Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the fanfiction guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Had Feral Lion Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. 10 years ago, Inko had made so many mistakes in her life, but she knew that this was her only chance to at least set one thing right. She was lucky Hisashi was away for a month when her 4-year-old son, Izuku, got his quirk. She wasn't sure how he got the quirk he did. Maybe because Hisashi's quirk technically made part dragon? Maybe that's why her little boy got a quirk that gave him the looks and powers of an other creature? But she didn't know enough about quirks to be sure. It didn't matter anyway, because this quirk was his only way out. When Inko found out her husband was a villain, it had been too late to escape him. Izuku had just been born and Hisashi would not allow his child to be taken away from him. It was clear he wanted Izuku to follow in his footsteps once he was old enough. He had been planting ideas into the boy's head from the moment he could speak. She knew, though, that Izuku would never become a villain. He loved heroes, and she had told him to never tell his father about that fact. But as you can expect from a child that young, he slipped a few times. And when he did, Hisashi would be so angry he turned his violence towards his son. It was the worst feeling she had ever felt. There had been no way for her to stop him from hurting her baby. And it just kept happening. So as soon as Izuku got his quirk, a quirk that would let him transform into a lion cub, she knew she had to say goodbye. This was the only way for him to escape and not to be hurt anymore. So she had bought them plane tickets to Africa. She had researched lion behavior. And she knew they would never hurt a cub, no matter if it was their own or not. So on their trip while sightseeing the lions in Africa, she told him to use his quirk when no one was looking. The vehicle they were in, together with the other tourists, had stopped on a place where they could see a pride of lions in the distance. When all the eyes of their group were on the animals they had come to see, she told her Izuku to hide in a bush next to the vehicle. And as soon as it drove away, to go to the other lions. He had been so excited and he wanted to meet the animals, wanted to know how they interacted and if he would be able to understand them. She told him this was the only way to get close enough and to get answers to all his questions. He had believed her, and he hadn't known that was the last time they would see each other. She hoped he was okay. But she knew that anywhere was better than back in Japan with Hisashi. There was just one last thing she had to do to save them both. He knew he was different from the rest. Once in a while, he would get this feeling. Like his chest was tightening, leaving no space for his lungs. Like his paws were on fire and his senses got muffled like he was underwater. It would start small but gradually get worse. When he was just a small cub, it happened much more often. Every couple of days. Now he could last about 15 before it started again. And the only thing that would make the feeling stop was something neither he or any other in the pride could ever get used to. His body would morph to a human form. Why it did that? He had no idea. After he changed, he couldn't change back right away either. He would be stuck for at the very least half a day before he was able to return to his own body. But as if all of that wasn't bad enough, it wasn't the only thing that made him different from the others. First there was his eyes. While the other lions all had yellow eyes, his were green. Then there was his growth. He was the only male, beside the 9-year-old dominant male of their pride, that had stayed in their group for as long as he has. He remembered the first time his brothers had to leave the pride. He had grown up with them and they spent their whole lives together, but for some reason when they matured enough at 3 years old to become nomads or take a pride of their own, he was still a small cub. He wasn't sure how long he had been in under the pride's protection now, but many young lions like himself had been born and had matured to leave. He knew it wouldn't be long until it was his turn now though. His manes had made an appearance and he now had a small mohawk of hair that would soon surround his face. If he was normal, would have had these features at the age of, but since he had taken so long to mature, and had plenty of life experience in his pride, he wouldn't be surprised if the primary male would want him gone soon. He thinks he will probably be leaving together with his brother who had just reached the age of 3, while his 2 sisters of that same age would stay with the pride they were in now. Although he wouldn't be surprised if his brother would try and take over here. He was cocky and admittedly strong for his age, but it was unlikely he would actually win in a fight against the 9-year-old male. He remembered when the lion had taken over from their previous primary male. It had been a brutal fight even though the other had already been 13 at the time and was far past his prime. He would miss the pride, but he wasn't particularly sad about it. The lionesses who had spent their lives raising him would soon be dying of old age. Besides, he knew he would be fine on his own. But for now he was content where he was, even knowing things would soon change. He couldn't have known just how much though. As most things in his life, it had started small. It wasn't unusual to see the big animals, with their shiny black armor, round paws, legs, and their constant roar. As always, they were being ridden by humans. He hadn't ever seen one without humans on or around it. So now and then they would get close to the pride and simply watch them while making murmuring noises which were unlike any other animal he had encountered. When he was younger, he would hide behind the lionesses and lion of the pride with the other cubs. But now he was strong enough to stand in front of the 3 cubs who were only a year old, together with the lionesses. From this position, he had a much better view of the humans on top of the weird roaring animal. They never got too close, but he and his pride were always on guard. The humans were hard to read. They didn't seem to be communicating in body language at all, and their murmuring noises were often in the same tone. But he still found it fascinating to watch them. They interacted so differently, and it was strange to see how they moved, like using their paws to pick up objects. He had tried doing the same when he was in his human form, picking up rocks and sticks. He had always found that very entertaining. But the fingers on his paws in his human form were useless. They didn't have claws, the skin wasn't strong enough to run long distances without breaking. Not to mention how slow his human form made him. It was simply inconvenient, but unfortunately for him still necessary to change to that form every 15 days. He wasn't sure how he knew, but his pride let the humans come closer than others would have. Maybe it was how the humans always stopped at a certain distance before moving closer when they saw that the lions weren't tensing as much as expected. Merely watching them without the fear that their instincts should have given them. That was probably his fault. The pride was so used to seeing him in his human form by now, knowing how helpless he was when he was like that, just made them less fearful than they probably should be of the people on top of the black animal. He listened to their talking while watching their behavior closely. He didn't understand a thing they were saying, but he still clung to every word, wishing for a way of making sure he could remember it all. It's amazing how close this pride is letting us without showing signs of aggression or other defensive behavior. One of them talked in the weird, impossible to understand language. The others made humming noises while bobbing their heads up and down. He tried to mimic it, nodding his head like the humans were doing. The lioness closest to him, the one that has cared for him for as long as he could remember, saw what he was doing and growled at him while nipping him in his shoulder as a warning. It was a clear, knock it off. Don't act like them. He huffed a little. It's not like he would show them his human form or anything. He stopped bobbing his head anyway. He knew his place. It was important to keep watching them, especially because the humans didn't use body language. They wouldn't show obvious signs of an attack, so that they had to keep their eyes open if they didn't want to be caught off guard when a fight broke out. And exactly for this reason he couldn't distract the pride. His eyes went back to the humans. And at that exact moment, he locked eyes with one of them. He didn't blink or break the eye contact. He knew they didn't think like him, but he didn't want to give the human a sign of trust. The dark brown eyes of the human widened. So maybe he did understand what this eye contact meant? Guys, please tell me I'm not the only one seeing this. He wanted to tilt his head at the funny sounds the guy was choking out while still keeping their eyes locked. He refrained though. What? What is it, Isaac? What do you see? The others directed their attention to the humans still looking at him. Only then did the human look away, instead turning his head to the others. He couldn't help but feel a bit smug about winning their little staring contest. Look at the young male in the front. About 2 years old, I think. His eyes. Then the human looked back into his eyes while pointing his finger right at him. This made all the other humans turn in his direction as well. He wasn't sure why, but suddenly they were all trying to make eye contact. He didn't like this. He bared his teeth just a little in warning. Were they threatening him? It's not like they could single him out. His pride wouldn't let that happen. He made eye contact with them, one by one, not backing down. He knew better than to show weakness in a potentially dangerous situation. No way. They're green? How is that possible? You think it's the work of a quirk? But that means someone had to get close enough to use their quirk on him. We've also been watching this area close enough that we would have noticed poachers or villains this far in. What would be the point anyway? Why would someone take such a risk just to change a lion's eye color? Maybe the lion himself has a quirk? More animals with quirks are being found every day, so it's possible. They were all quiet after that. But their voices had been just a bit louder, less cautious, and they were all leaning forward. He and his pride could feel the emotions shifting, and they were now all baring their teeth, telling the humans they had overstayed their welcome. The humans seemed to take notice though. Marcel, get ready to drive. Adrian, did you get pictures? It's time to get out of here. We need to get this back to the boss. I'm sure he'll want to keep close watch on this one when he hears about it. Hell, he'll probably want to bring him in for research. All right. I got him on camera. I really hope I get to see him again. After a few more mumbles back and forth, the animal they rode started moving away from them. Most of humans were still looking at him from over their shoulder. The pride relaxed as the humans got farther away. Beyond. He couldn't help his fascination with the species of his other form. He wished he would get to see the humans again soon. He really should have known to be careful what you wish for. The humans started appearing more and more often. Their attention always mainly on him. He didn't care anymore. They never got too close anyway, and he knew their stares weren't challenges even if his instinct sometimes told him otherwise. They came back every day now, tracking the pride on that armored animal they always rode. And still, there wasn't another lioness watching him. He would try to mimic some of their movements. The only thing that made him nervous was the knowledge that soon he would have to turn to his human form. If that happened when the humans were near, he knew he couldn't protect himself. And neither would the pride. They didn't mind when he turned human and wouldn't leave him to vent for himself, but in the face of danger they couldn't have a weak link. Normally, when cubs were too weak, they would be left to die. If they kept the weak around, the strength of the pride would suffer. He was a special case. He was strong, he could protect himself and the pride, but he just had these short moments of weakness when he would turn human. So they kept him around. But he was aware that as soon as it became a liability, they wouldn't hesitate to leave him behind. He just hoped he would change back when the humans weren't there to see it. They were walking down a familiar path leading to the lake to drink when they came across a herd of buffaloes and decided they could do with a meal anyway. The humans had already been that day, so he assumed they would let them eat in peace. He helped the lionesses hunt, stalking their prey. The area had quite a few bushes and trees. They were lucky as the terrain gave them cover to get close enough. One of the buffaloes was just a bit further away from the group than the rest. He could see the eyes of the lionesses around him found their target in that buffalo. As if they could think like one, which they sort of could, they jumped out in the open in the same time, using their hind legs to push them forward, and in less than a second they were running. The buffaloes took off as well, but in a surprise attack like this there was no getting away for the chosen prey. Not when they had already been this close. They weren't this lucky often. It had been an easy meal. Because of the empty terrain, the prey could often see them coming long before they could jump them like this. It had still been a little bit of a struggle. Once the first lioness was on top of the animal, he and the others tried to go for the throat. The young cubs joined in too, having reached the age where they started to learn how to make themselves useful in the hunt. But they were still small and often didn't know what they were doing, so they were made to go for the hind legs of the prey, away from the horns that could still kill one of them even though they already had the animal in their clutches. Eventually he was the one that got hold of the throat, and it was over very quickly after that. The pride happily ate, but after the first few bites he realized how much energy he had used. They had already been on a trip before they decided to attack the prey, and now that they had laid down to munch on the warm flesh, he could feel the toll it had taken on his body. His chest tightened, his paws hurt, and the dead buffalo right in front of him turned into a blurry dark form on the ground. He sighed. He was just glad the humans probably wouldn't bother them again for the day, and they wouldn't see him until he would be back in his real body. And he let his body morph. His front paws grew fingers, his fur disappeared, His head became rounder and nose shorter. His manes got traded for long green hair on top of his head, and his tail became shorter until it was gone as well. The pride didn't even blink, too used to his weird habit. As soon as the morph was complete, he returned to the food in front of him. No longer was the buffalo blurry, but his eyesight was nowhere near as good as when he had his real body. His teeth were no longer able to rip the hard skin, so instead he focused on the meat that had already been ripped off of the animal. It was a lot colder now that he didn't have his fur, and he leaned into the lion closest to him, one of the younger adult lionesses. She didn't seem to mind, she only gave him a lick on the top of his head, pushing his long curly hair out of his face, and then continued eating. This was the first time he was in human form while eating prey though. It was interesting how the meat tasted different to him. It wasn't as good as when he was in his real body, but still the warmth of the flesh helped with the cold, so he didn't mind. He wouldn't pass up an opportunity to eat anyway. It was important if he wanted to stay strong and keep up with his family. When all that remained of the prey were bones, the pride took the opportunity to relax. Some napped, others groomed themselves or each other, and the cubs played together. He decided to nap as well, laying his frail human body in between his young brother and sister to keep warm. When he woke up a little while later, he felt how his body got more strength. He wasn't as tired anymore, and his muscles had stopped aching. He had learned this meant he was good to change back to his real body. He made sure to crawl away from his siblings first, not wanting to wake them up or disturb them when his body got bigger like he knew it would. Even though his body felt stronger, not all the pain had disappeared. Actually, this pain was new. He doesn't even remember ever feeling this before. His stomach was hurting and he felt a little dizzy. It would probably disappear when he morphed back though. His human form was very fragile after all. He imagined himself as a lion again. He imagined his strong paws, his manes, his tail. And one by one his lion features appeared. But even now that he was back in his real body, his stomach still hurt like it did before. He groaned. This got the attention of one of the elderly lionesses. One that has been with him for as long as he could remember. She walked over to him and let herself drop to the ground beside him. She started licking his manes to comfort him. He knew she could feel his unease. He gurgled to show his appreciation. Not long after they made their way to the water as planned. Maybe he was just thirsty? But he has been thirsty before, and his stomach never hurt like this because of that. Plus he had been without water for much longer without any trouble. But maybe it would help anyway. It didn't help. If anything, it got worse. When they finished drinking, they made their way back deeper into their territory to find a good place to rest. But walking just got harder and harder. His stomach hurt, and when they finally stopped, he couldn't do anything beside let himself drop on the ground. He laid on his side, only focusing on his breathing. The pain just wouldn't go away. He was awakened by roaring. Unmistakably the roaring of the animal the humans always rode. No other animal roared like that, and no animal could roar for as long as this one could without even taking breaths in between. He wondered what the animal's deal was. The thought quickly left his mind though, because when he got up, planning to walk to the front of the pride with the other strong lionesses, he realized he felt even worse than before. And suddenly something happened that had never happened before. He threw up. He choked up some pieces of the buffalo he had eaten just the day before. His paws felt weak and he wobbled a bit before falling to the ground after only a few steps. He heard some commotion from the humans but didn't bother looking at them this time. Too busy wheezing and trying to blink the fog out of his eyes. Sheet, don't tell me that's the one with the green eyes that just dropped. I think it is. He doesn't look good. What do we do, boss? It was quiet for a moment before another spoke up. This one had much more authority in his voice. Even without seeing body language, it was clear that this guy was the leader of their pack. Well, we brought everything we need, right? It's time we bring him in anyway. And just like that, he felt the emotions of the humans shift. Anticipation, nervousness. He didn't like it. And he didn't like that he was in no state to defend himself now. He knew the pride cared for their sick, but in the face of actual danger they couldn't do anything for him. The pride felt the same thing he did. And the humans started moving closer. The animal they were on started roaring louder. And that was probably the real threat, wasn't it? Humans were weak, he would know. But this thing, he's seen how fast it is. And with armor like that, It wouldn't be easy to kill. The lionesses roared back at it. The cubs had their full attention on the threat in front of them as well now. They all knew how the others felt, they knew what the others thought. They were individuals, but they were also one. And he knew the decision that had to be made. Fight or flee. If they fought, he could easily die in the state he was in. But if they fled, he would definitely die. But his life didn't matter in the bigger picture, and that was fine with him. The pride was the most important thing here, and the threat in front of them was a danger to them. The animal got closer, the lionesses backed up. Just a little while roaring loudly, showing all their teeth. The animal gave no reaction beside moving closer. And the decision was made. It was too dangerous. They could not take this thing on, not with their 2 elderly, 3 cubs and 2 lions who had only just reached adulthood. So that meant there were only 5 fighters left. It wasn't enough to take that thing on. This was the first time he felt so helpless in his life. But he was glad. The pride would be safe. He would be a sacrifice, but also the reason they got to live. And he gladly filled that role. By now the humans were way closer than they had ever been. The pride made a run for it, leaving him behind. He tried to push himself up, but he couldn't. Everything swayed in front of him as he was just able to get his front legs under himself, so he wasn't on the ground fully, growling dangerously at the humans. "Don't come any closer." They didn't listen. Then he heard a sound. Like wind, but faster and sharper, and before he could even think about what it could be, he something sting in his shoulder. It felt a bit like getting stung by a bee. The humans had stopped moving closer now, and the animal was no longer roaring as loud. He wondered what they were trying to say. He was aware they were still talking to each other, but even if he knew what the noises meant, he couldn't even extinguish the different sounds from each other anymore. And before he knew it, his vision got dark, his front legs couldn't carry the little weight he had put on them anymore, and he dropped onto his side. Only being aware of the world around him, even without his sight, for a few more seconds, and then the world around him disappeared. When he woke up, everything felt muted. His muscles felt stiff and he had a hard time opening his eyes. He was vaguely aware of the shaking. The floor was shaking. Why was the floor shaking? It was hard to even think. It felt impossible to panic even though his instincts were screaming at him. Slowly his sense started returning to him. He became aware of the constant roar around him. It came from everywhere. It sounded like the animal the humans always brought with them. He slowly managed to open his eyes. It was dark around him. There was only a patch of light coming through an opening above his head. An opening? He looked around himself, seeing walls on every side. It was like he was trapped in a box. No, wait, he was actually trapped in a box. Oh God, he was trapped. The panic was finally starting to make an appearance. He used the adrenaline flowing through his body to push himself up and look through the opening. The world was moving. How the hell was the world moving? He wasn't walking. Was he riding that strange armored animal that had tried to attack his pride? When that thought entered his head, he suddenly realized how alone he was. How vulnerable he was without the strength of the pride. He missed them. He would gladly have died for them. But somehow he didn't. And now he was alone. There were so many smells around him that he had never encountered before. The roaring of the animal blocked all other sounds, so he didn't have his hearing to rely on either. He wasn't sure what to do. He couldn't stay here. But was there a way out? He started scratching the walls desperately, roaring loudly. Death would be better than this. Why couldn't the big animal just finish him off? Suddenly the roaring stopped. Instead he heard human voices. Looks like he woke up a little too early. We're almost there. He needs to be put him back to sleep. There's no way we can get him out of the container when we get there otherwise. I've got it. And suddenly there was some kind of stick entering the box he was in through the small opening. He quickly moved backwards away from it. He hissed at it when suddenly he heard the same wild-like sound he had heard before, followed by a sting in his chest this time. And everything went black again. When he woke up again, it took a moment for his memories to return. He messed up. He wasn't sure what he could have done to prevent this. But there had to have been something he could have done. How did he end up in this situation? He opened his eyes, looked around him. He was no longer in the box, but this wasn't much better. It was no longer dark, but he had nowhere to go. Fences were all around him. He was no longer in a box. No, he was in a cage instead. It was big enough to stand up and even pace back and forth a little, but there was no way he could do as much as run. As soon as he was able to get himself up, he started pacing and biting the fences to find weak spots. When he felt his muscles starting to respond better, he jumped up on the fence only to fall back down. No matter how many times he jumped, bit and scratched at it, there was not even a scratch on the cage. He wasn't sure for how long he kept trying, but it felt like a long time. His nose got scratched up from constantly trying to bite the fence and his paws hurt from all the pacing and scratching. Then 2 humans appeared. He didn't recognize them as the people who had tracked the pride up until just a day ago. How do you even go about this? I'm not a quirkologist. How am I meant to find out what quirk a lion has beside green eyes? This is madness. I don't know. Sounds like a you problem to me. Just do what you do best, I guess. The one who spoke first got a grin on his face after he heard those words from the second. He shivered. He didn't like that grin. Well, I'll leave you to it then. Good luck. Second laughed as he patted First on the shoulder. Second walked away while First stayed close to his cage. He hissed at him. Not so friendly, are you? First hummed. Well, you're going to need a name first. You have green eyes, so I guess Kijani works for now. I just got to grab some of my tools. I'll be right back for you, Kijani. First waved at him. The gesture didn't do anything but confuse him though. And then First walked away. Was back in just a couple minutes. This time with some kind of rod in his hand. Let's see how you respond to this. Don't worry if we don't find your quirk right away though. We'll just keep trying until we do. He pushed the rod through the fence, touching his shoulder, and suddenly his whole body was buzzing. And not a pleasant kind of buzzing. Anything but pleasant. His whole body hurt as it shook. He had no time to think or to react. It was over in just a second, but he could feel every nerve stinging with pain. He didn't get the chance to catch his breath as the rod was pushed back in without him noticing because all he could focus on was the pain. And it just kept happening until the human sighed. Guess it doesn't have to do with electricity then. Not that I expected it to. Worth the try anyway. First sounded disappointed. At this point he couldn't do anything but lay on the ground, still shaking. He had hoped that was the end of it. But of course it wasn't. The man kept coming back with different tools. But in his mind they were all the same. Tools were pain. Humans were pain. He was so stupid for ever thinking they were weak. He was stupid for ever being interested in them. He was stupid for ever trying to mimic them. Did they take pleasure in hurting him? What was the point? He was aware that he had hurt and killed animals too, but that was for food. For survival. And he and his pride always tried to bite through the animal's throat quickly to make the death as quick as possible. Days went by. He got fed with parts if dead animals. They smelled bad, as if they had been dead for days if not longer. He got water out of a bowl instead of the lake and it tasted so much different. He never wanted to get used to it. Chain POV. 11 years ago Chain had made a big mistake. It had been his turn to guide a group of tourists to show them some lion prides and he had forgotten to count the tourists before and after the trip. Which wouldn't have been such a big F up if they hadn't been missing a kid after they came back. The strange thing is, his mother had left without him. She hadn't even spoken a word about her son being gone. And she had left before the boss had checked the security cameras and figured out what had happened. Apparently both mother and son had lived in Japan. After checking the forms the mother had filled in, he found that her name was Inko Midoriya. He had tried to find her on social media, even though his boss decided to keep this whole thing under wraps and had forbidden him to talk about it or to contact Miss Midoriya. Chain couldn't have contacted her anyway, even if he was allowed to. When he finally found an account that belonged to the woman, it was filled with messages of RIP. And after some digging, he found out she killed herself only days after their trip to Africa. Chain had felt awful. He wasn't allowed to be a tour guide ever again. But he did still see the lions as he would often go with the research squad to check in on the animals. But every time before he went out, he would look at a picture he had found on Midoriya Inko's social media account. He would look at the 4-year-old boy's face, with his green eyes, freckles, and green hair. And he would keep his eyes open and searching every trip, just in case he would see the boy. But he never did. He had stopped looking at the picture every time before he went out eventually, but the small face was printed into his memories. When the Green Eyes lion had entered their research facility at first, Chain hadn't thought anything of it. He knew of the man who their boss had ordered to find out the animal's quirk. And he knew of his methods. It made him feel terrible, but there was nothing he could do to stop it. It took about 2 weeks of hurting the poor young lion before they finally decided to inject him with quirk suppressants to see what would happen. And when he heard of the results, he couldn't believe it and had to see it for himself. He never expected to see that face though. The green curly hair that had now grown much longer, the freckles that were slightly hidden behind the dirt and scratches on his face. His eyes were close and the boy seemed unconscious, but there was no mistaking it. It was the kid. Izuku POV. When he opened his eyes, everything hurt. For some reason he felt a lot colder than before. It felt like he had lost his fur. And then he realized that he had. And not only that, he was in his human form. How had that happened and when? He had never turned without meaning to before. What did the humans do to him? And worse, what would they do to him now that he was even weaker than before? He curled up in a corner, trying to preserve his body heat as much as he could. He was barely aware of the humans around him. It looked like they were talking to him. Didn't they know lions didn't speak human? Did they think that he was one of them just because he had to change his form to look like them once in a while? It was hard to think straight. Then a human entered his cage. They hadn't done that before when he had his real body, probably well aware he would rip them to shreds to protect himself if he did. The human was different than the one that had been hurting him every day. But that didn't matter to him. Humans were disgusting creatures and he didn't want any of them near him. So he growled, baring his teeth. He knew it wouldn't look anywhere near as intimidating as it would when he did it as a lion, but he hoped it would get the message across. Hey kid, it's Izuku, right? Izuku Midoriya? It's okay, I won't hurt you. The human was speaking in a quiet tone, making his body smaller by crouching. As if the human was sneaking up to a prey. He growled louder and hissed. His back had hit the cage behind him and he couldn't back up any further. He felt trapped. The human got one step closer and he did the only thing he could think of to protect himself. He jumped up and attacked the human, biting and scratching at the arms that were extended towards him. The human yelped loudly and quickly jumped back. He could see blood on the human's arm, but he was still disappointed with the little damage he did. Why couldn't he just turn back? The human left the cage, holding his arms close to his chest while hissing at the pain. At that moment, another human approached. He recognized this one as the alpha of their pack. Don't bother trying to befriend him, Chain. The alpha spoke. I already spoke to some people. Tomorrow someone is coming to pick him up and bring him back to Japan. He's not our problem anymore. The alpha sounded a bit disappointed. He wasn't sure why he was disappointed, but he was glad all the same. Stupid humans. Really? What were they like? What will they do with him? Apparently they have some animal with a quirk that makes him super intelligent. So he might know how to handle the kid. They're also bringing someone whose quirk erases other quirks to prevent him from turning back. I don't know what they'll do with him, but like I said, not our problem. Just bring him some blankets and some actual human food. He should be fine to stay there for one more night. He'll be gone tomorrow anyway. Dadzawa POV. Aizawa, I have a question for you. Nedzu told him. Shoyuta looked at the rat skeptically. I heard you and Yamato were looking to adopt. How is that coming along? Shoyuta very much regretted going to this meeting. It was only a few months before Shoyuta would become the homeroom teacher of the new 1A. The entrance exams would start soon, and even though he would never admit it to anyone, he was glad to be teaching again soon. He wasn't one to sit around, and as an underground hero, he couldn't patrol during the day. Not that he regretted expelling a whole class last year. The kids wouldn't have made it far into their hero career, and he refused to be responsible for more kids dying. Another thing he wouldn't admit, not even to himself, is that he enjoyed being around and helping the kids he taught. He genuinely cared about them, and his husband, Hazashi, was probably the only one who knew just how much. Which was also the reason they had been talking about adopting lately. They both liked the idea of raising a child of their own. Despite their differences, or maybe because of them, they fit together like puzzle pieces. They understood each other and completed each other. and they had both come to the conclusion that they wanted to share their love and home to raise a child. As heroes, they had both encountered many children who grew up going through hell. And as heroes, they wanted to save. To give a child the loving home they deserved, a home where they were cared for. A home they knew they could offer. They weren't even actively looking yet, but somehow the rat found out about their wish. Shoyuta wasn't even surprised. So when Nedzu asked him to accompany him to Africa, to pick up a child who had never experienced the love of a parent, he reluctantly said yes. Reluctantly, because he didn't want to humor the rat. But he knew this might be just what he and Hisashi were looking for, and they might be just what the kid needed to be happy. He decided not to tell his husband the details yet. First, he wanted to get a good look at the situation himself before Hisashi would go in full, overexcited parent mode. Obviously, the only reason for him keeping quiet about it was because he didn't want to put up with the over-enthusiastic behavior the blonde would certainly display after hearing it. And not because he didn't want to disappoint the man he loved if he couldn't keep his promise. On the plane on their way to Africa, Nedzu explained the situation to him in more detail. They were going to see a kid named Midoriya Izuku. He had disappeared while he and his mother were on a trip in Africa, and his mother had gone back to Japan alone. Shortly after the woman had committed suicide. The people who found Izuku contacted the authorities in Japan, hoping to reunite him with his father. But as it turned out, a few years after the kid's disappearance and his mother's suicide, the father had been imprisoned for villainy. The kid still had to go back to Japan, but he would go to an orphanage, which apparently was almost impossible in his situation. What that situation was, Nedzu didn't explain. When he and Nedzu arrived in Africa and stood in front of a growling caged lion with takeout food in the corner of the cage, he raised his eyebrow. Was this some kind of joke? So this is the kid in question? Shoyuta asked skeptically in English so that the owners of the lion could understand him. Nedzu was grinning at him a little though. What was this rat planning? One of them, whose name Shoyuta didn't bother to remember, replied in English as well. You're the one who can erase quirks, right? Just use your quirk on him and you'll see. Shoyuta sighed but did as asked. He activated his quirk on the lion, who had his full attention on Nedzu, so didn't notice when Shuta's hair came up and his eyes started glowing red. Within seconds the lion turned into a kid who looked like he was about the same age as the first-year students at UA. But beside his appearance, nothing about him looked like a child. He still sat in the back of his cage, on his hands and feet, his skin tainted with dirt, his long green hair matted like it had never been brushed in his life, his lips lifted upwards to bare his blood-stained teeth. His eyes held so much hate that evaporated to make place for fear as soon as he noticed what had happened. He kept growling like a lion would and backed up using his hands and feet until his back hit the cage he was in. Shoyuta couldn't believe what he was seeing. What had happened to this child? He had scratches all over his body, and he was shivering in fear. His hand went for the handle of the cage's door without thinking, but the guy that had told him to use his quirk earlier stopped him. I wouldn't do that if I were you. He attacked the last guy who entered. He bit and scratched at the guy until he bled before he got out. Shoyuta stepped back and had to blink. Almost instantly the kid morphed back to a lion. If the situation wasn't so horrendous, it would have been fascinating to watch how he transformed without any effort whatsoever. The kid seemed to relax just a little when he quickly glanced down at his hands to find they had turned back into clawed paws. The tension never left him though, and he kept his teeth bared, warning them not to come closer. Soon Nedzu went inside with the others to discuss how to transport him back to Japan. Shoyuta stayed outside with the lion kid. He sat down next to the cage and relaxed his body. He put his hands on his knees where Izuku could see them. Now that the other people were gone, Shoyuta had the kid's full attention. They just sat there looking at each other. And after a few minutes, Shoyuta could see some of the tension ease out of the lion's body. He almost smiled at the little progress, but he refrained from doing so as he didn't want to risk scaring the animal kid again. It wasn't long until Nedzu came back out with some others. One of them who hadn't been with them before carried something Shoyuta quickly recognized as a tranquilizer gun. He stood up and raised his eyebrows. Because honestly, what the F dash? Were they really tranquilizing a kid just to get him back to his birth country? He glanced over his shoulder to look at the lion just to see the tension and fear had returned. Seriously? He asked Nedzu in Japanese. Nedzu frowned. Apparently he wasn't happy with the decision either, and that made Shoyuta feel just a little bit better. At least he knew Nedzu wouldn't do something he didn't like unless there was no other way. A necessary evil then. Why don't you inform Yamada of your new foster kid? I'll arrange everything legally. Of course the rat knew Shoyuta had made a decision about wanting to take the kid home even before he knew himself. When he sighed and walked away to call his husband, he realized the other reason Nedzu had told him to do so. Nedzu knew he wouldn't want to be there when they tranquilized his kid. All he could do for him was make sure he recovered both physically and mentally when they got him home. He waited with his phone against his ear until he heard Hisashi's voice. Shoyuta? Why are you calling? Did something go wrong on your mission? Instead of answering the question, Shoyuta replied. I'll be back tomorrow. You think you can get the quest room ready before then? The guest room? Why would I? Wait, are you saying what I think you are? He could hear the failed attempt to disguise the excitement in Hisashi's voice. Yeah, it looks like we'll be foster parents sooner than we expected. My G-. Shoyuta couldn't see his husband from across and whirled, so he did the next best thing to erase the man's quirk. He hung up. He'd just text him the details later. When he noticed he was smiling, he quickly corrected himself. Other people didn't need to know that Shoyuta knew how to smile. Izuku POV. The previous day. He had no idea what the humans had brought him this time. It stood on the spot where they usually laid down the old meat for him to eat. But if there was anything he did know about it, it was that this wasn't meat. And therefore, not edible. He stared at it for a while but didn't approach it. He was still in his human form, and last time he ate while in his human form he got sick. Even though he got better and hadn't even noticed it because he had been in constant pain anyway, now that they hadn't hurt him for a day, he finally came to realize that the pain in his stomach had disappeared too. So even if the weird-smelling stuff they put in his cage was actual food, he wouldn't risk getting sick from eating like this again. It's not like he had to eat every day anyway. His meals weren't as big as he would have caught when he was still free, but they had been a lot more often. He couldn't deny he felt hungry though. Maybe that was a human thing. The humans had also thrown some kind of fabric into the cage, and he really wasn't sure what he was meant to do with that. Maybe decoration? He didn't care anyway, as he refused to touch it. It took a while for the humans to leave him alone. They just kept staring at him like they did when he was still with his pride. But this time it was a lot scarier. Not only did he know how much humans could hurt now, he was also in his weak human form and felt completely defenseless. When the sun went down, the last human finally left. And soon after, he felt the mental string that he had unconsciously kept pulling on finally give in, and he changed back into his real body. He sighed in relief. Even if being a lion didn't make him safe, at least it felt familiar and stronger. In the morning the humans were back. It didn't surprise him anymore. He started growling without even really thinking about it. He knew they wouldn't listen to his warning to back off, but his instincts told him to keep the threat up anyway. What did surprise him, however, was that first of all there was someone new in the group that he had never seen before. Not that he kept up with everyone who came to observe him, but he felt like he would have remembered this guy. He looked a lot different from the rest, with his long black hair that formed itself around his face like manes would for an adult lion, all the black clothes he wore, and the big white cloth he wore around his neck. That's not what caught his eye though. Next to the strange man with the black manes, stood an animal who seemed like some kind of weird combination between a mouse and a bear and maybe something else he didn't know. But all he could see at the moment was a prey. So this is the kid in question? He didn't pay the voice any mind. Only focused on the prey in front of him. Why would they bring a prey outside his cage? Did they finally decide bringing him old parts of dead animals was too much work and would let him hunt for himself? But then why was it outside of the cage instead of inside with him? Maybe it wasn't enough of a challenge to catch it if it was inside his cage. He had to agree with that. That would probably make it too easy. You're the one who can erase quirks, right? Just use your quirk on him and you'll see. It's not like he hunts for fun, but there was always some satisfaction in getting to eat after he had to work for it first. And suddenly he felt the mental string snap. And after having spent hours yesterday pulling at that string to try to get his real body back, he knew what that meant. And after just one glance down at his paws, his suspicion was confirmed. His paws were gone and his claws had made way for useless human fingers. The prey was forgotten instantly. It's not like he would be able to kill anything with this stupid weak body anyway. And there was a much bigger threat than starving at the moment. These humans knew how to cause him pain. The new one couldn't be any different, right? Would they finally hurt him while he was in his human form? Would they kill him? He didn't doubt they could. The black mayonnaise guy reached forward, but before he could enter his cage, the alpha human stopped him. Although, alpha human didn't seem to have much authority over black main man. But then again, their body language was almost impossible to read, and black main human did stop when alpha human ordered him to. So he was probably be wrong about that. I wouldn't do that if I were you. He attacked the last guy who entered. He bit and scratched at the guy until he bled before he got out. Alpha human said. Black main human stepped back. So alpha human must also be this guy's alpha then. Then he felt the mental string give in and he quickly took his own body back. He glanced down to look at his paws just in case, and then he let the familiarity of his own body comfort him only a little without letting his defenses down. The humans left with the prey, who he realized now he had forgotten about because of the fear of being in his weak form. They left Mr. Blackmane behind though, who sat down on the ground beside his cage. What a strange thing to do. How was the human meant to look threatening like that? Blackmane even kept his hands on his knees so he could see there was no tool there to hurt him with. Without his own permission, he felt the old curiosity he used to feel seeing humans returning. He stared at Blackmane. And Blackmane stared back. He couldn't find any malice in the human's eyes. He triple-checked it, but still the human looked calm and relaxed and also curious. He hadn't even noticed how contagious the human's calmness was until his body had already slightly relaxed. But the human didn't react to it. Blackmane didn't attack or take it as an invitation to approach. And somehow, despite the fear and the hate towards humans, he felt grateful. But all these thoughts evaporated as soon as he saw the humans and prey walking back towards him. All the tension was back, especially when he saw a tool in one of the humans' hands. Blackmane stood up, frowning at the tool as well. Would they hurt Blackmane too because his hair looked a bit like lion mane's? And even though Blackmane is human, and he hated humans, he felt worried for the man. Blackmane was the nicest human he had met so far and he didn't want him hurt. Seriously? Blackmane spoke. Why don't you inform Yamada of your new foster kid? I'll arrange everything legally. Prey said, blowing his mind. Prey could talk human? He didn't even know what to think about that. He couldn't understand what Prey had said with the human words, but luckily the animal was a lot easier to read than the humans. And the message was loud and clear. Leave, Prey told Blackmane. And Blackmane listened. He didn't even have time to be confused at how the hell a prey animal could have authority over a human because as soon as Blackmane had left, the tool was pointed at him. He heard the by now familiar wind-like sound and felt the sting in his shoulder. He knew what that meant and he tried everything he could to keep his eyes open. It didn't work. The world around him disappeared. Dadzawa POV. Getting the unconscious lion into an animal transport box and into the plane had turned out to be a lot easier than expected. The guys from the lion research team seemed to have experience transporting lions and had known exactly how to handle the situation. Once they had boarded the plane and were on their way back to Japan, Shoyuta was texting back and forth with his husband to let him know what to expect and how to set up Izuku's room. The windows had to be replaced with Quirk-proof glass in case Izuku would try to break through them. The room shouldn't have any breakable objects or other things the kid could use to hurt himself with. Beside that, they would need a bunch of the most comfortable clothes for him, as it would probably take a while for him to get used to wearing them. To say Hizashi was excited would be an understatement. The 20 hours it would take to get the kid home was not much time to get everything done, but he knew he could trust his husband to get everything ready in time. The last thing they would need was a bunch of Quirk suppressants. As much as Shoyuta hated having to use them, he knew it was important for Izuku to get used to being human first before turning back into a lion. They had decided it would be best for Izuku to keep him in his own room for a few days until he had calmed down enough to be introduced to the rest of the house. They would be with him as often as they could. Hisashi had already informed him he had taken some time off patrol and his radio station, and of course Nezu had already cleared Shuta's own schedule. When they finally arrived back in Japan, Hisashi was there with some clothes for the kid as Shoyuta had asked him to. They would have to inject the kid with Quirk suppressants and take him back to their apartment before he woke up in order to subject him to the least amount of stress possible. He couldn't even imagine how terrified the kid would be either way, having been ripped from everything he knew. But it was the only way for Izuku to still have a chance at a normal life. Even with knowing the situation beforehand, Hisashi was still stunned seeing the huge, unconscious lion in the transport box. Together they lifted him out of the box and gently put him on the ground. Despite both of them being strong from years of hero work, they still struggled with the weight. Luckily they didn't have to carry him far. Once Izuku was out, Shoyuta injected him with the Quirk suppressants, and within seconds the lion turned back into a kid. Hisashi gasped at it, and Shoyuta heard a sound coming from the blonde's mouth that sounded like a shocked "Sho." Shoyuta understood the reaction well. He had been at a loss for words too the first time he had seen the kid in his real body. Nezu came walking towards them with Chiyo by his side. Shoyuta hadn't even thought about asking for Recovery Girl's assistance, so Nezu must have asked her to be there. He wouldn't admit it, but he was glad the rat had thought ahead. Recovery Girl gave Izuku a kiss on his forehead, and Shoyuta and Hisashi quickly wiped most of the dirt off of the boy before dressing him in some comfortable clothes. After all that was taken care of, they quickly got him into the car to bring him back to their apartment. They were on a time limit as it would be very stressful, not to mention dangerous, if the kid woke up in the car and freaked out there. Luckily they got him in his new room before that happened. Hisashi had done an amazing job getting Izuku's room ready. Shoyuta gave his husband a grateful look after they entered. On the floor was a thick fluffy carpet, the bed wasn't too high, and there was a small desk with a chair in front of it. Some notebooks and picture books were on a shelf next to it. Shoyuta assumed Izuku had probably never learned to read, and even if he could, he hadn't been in Japan since he was 4, so it wouldn't be in Japanese. He wasn't even sure if he remembered how to speak Japanese. So picture books would do for now. Beside that, there were lots of pillows and blankets in the room. So it was open but cozy. Shoyuta left Hisashi with the kid while he quickly showered and changed. As soon as he re-entered the room, Hisashi whispered to him, "Shoyuta, I think he's waking up." Shoyuta looked at Izuku, and indeed he was slowly blinking before looking up and around himself. Izuku POV. Even before he had opened his eyes, he knew he was in a different place than he was before. There was no wind in his fur, no noises of birds or other wildlife around him. He didn't hear leaves from trees and bushes rustling. Not to mention the smell was very different from what he was used to. Even the air felt thicker, as if he was in a deep cave or something. When he finally opened his eyes, he had to blink a couple times before his vision got clearer. And when he looked around, he was first of all very confused with his surroundings. He had never been in a place like this, and he had never seen the objects that stood around him before. Then his eyes met the black eyes of Blackmane, who sat on the ground with another human who looked a lot like Blackmane except for how his manes were blonde and pulled back away from his face. Was he placed with people who also had lion traits? Not that he was a human with lion traits. He was just a lion who sadly had to deal with human traits sometimes. He scrambled back as far as he could to get away from the humans, baring his teeth and growling loudly at them. "Stay away from me," he warned them using his body language. But as he did so, he noticed how his body felt different. He quickly glanced down while still keeping the humans in his field of vision to check his paws. There were no paws there, only the human fingers he hated so much. Fear filled his body and he growled louder. Blondmane looked at Blackmane with an expression he could only describe as concerned. But that couldn't be right, and he wasn't good at reading humans anyway, so he assumed that couldn't be true. Humans weren't concerned with him. They only hurt him. Then he realized something else. It felt like he still had fur? But it was different. It wasn't the comfortable protection he was used to. Instead it sat around his frame like cloth. Like what the humans always wore around their body. Another glance at himself confirmed his theory. Hell no. He wasn't one of them. He wouldn't admit that it was kind of comfortable and warm. Instead he started biting at the fabric around his arm. not caring he was also nipping his own skin. Hey there, little listener, don't dash. Blonde Mane spoke in human language while leaning forward as if he was going to reach towards him but stopped speaking and stayed back when Black Mane's hand settled on the man's shoulder. Just let him, Hizashi. We can't stop him anyway. He first needs to feel comfortable around us. If you try to stop him now, he'll probably just think you're attacking him. They were both talking very quietly, very differently from all the other humans he had encountered so far. And then he remembered how he had been concerned for Black Mane. Had the humans hurt him too? Was that why they were locked up together in this weird space? Then he saw Blonde Mane look at Black Mane and nod his head. He remembered always trying to mimic the action when he was a lion. Even if he didn't like humans, even if they hurt him so much, maybe Black Mane had received the same treatment. His eyes flickered to the scars that littered Black Mane's hands and came to the conclusion it was probably true. And then he saw there were scars on Blonde Mane's hands too. Blonde Mane must be in the same situation as them. So he decided to show he understood them, he understood their pain, and even if he didn't trust them, as long as they didn't get any closer to him, he wouldn't attack. He stopped growling. He let his upper lip relax to cover his teeth and repeated the motion he had just seen Blonde Mane make. He nodded his head up and down. It took a moment for them both to react, but then Blonde Mane gasped a little, and that was enough for him to flinch back even though his back was already against the wall and his lip curled back up to show his teeth again. Black Mane himself hadn't reacted much beside the corners of the man's mouth turning upwards just a little, like he had tried to stop himself from smiling but quickly let it drop when he heard Blonde Mane's gasp and saw him react the way he did at the noise. Really, Hizashi? Black Mane sighed. Sorry, little listener, I didn't mean to scare you. Blonde Mane said, and his eyes held a bit of sadness. Was he sad because he made him flinch? He wasn't sure. Humans were confusing. He tilted his head down just a little but kept his teeth bared. It's fine. But stay back. Black Mane then looked at him and started speaking human. Was he trying to speak human to him? Were humans really so clueless that they didn't understand animals didn't know what any of those sounds meant? Try to calm down if you can, Izuku. This idiot is Hizashi and my name is Shoyuda. It's nice to officially meet you. I promise we won't hurt you. He squinted his eyes a little. Yup, they were clueless. He had the urge to shake his head because of all the stupidity, but that would mean he had to take his eyes off the humans and he wasn't risking that. Then Blonde Mane spoke up, also looking in his direction. They both kept their voices low and soothing. At least they weren't shouting like a lot of humans he had encountered before. He didn't like it when they did that. How are you liking your new room? Once you get comfortable enough, we can go to the mall together so you can pick your own things. But maybe we can order some things online before then if you want. He tilted his head a little. He noticed how his lips had slowly started to cover his teeth again. Why did they have this effect on him? Any other lion would have attacked already. Maybe he was just stupid, but he couldn't help how he relaxed a little in the calm atmosphere the humans were creating by sitting on the ground, hands where he could see them and talking to him in soft voices. He noticed Black Mane studying him then. He let his gaze trail back to the man. Can you understand us, Izuku? Black Mane said. He didn't react to it except for studying the man in return. He still thought he was kind of funny looking. You think he doesn't remember how to speak Japanese? Maybe he only understands Swahili. Blonde Mane said while looking at Black Mane. At this point I'm wondering if he knows how to speak at all. He might have been living with lions since he was, I don't know if he remembers. A time before then. Black Mane seemed to reply to Blonde Mane. Blonde Mane frowned. I guess time will tell. Let's just make sure the little listener trusts us first. Then we can work speaking. Black Mane nodded, and the man had this look in his eyes while looking at Blonde Mane. It reminded him of how a lioness would look at her newborn cubs, but different. It was like Black Mane really cared about Blonde Mane. But before he could think about it more, Blonde Mane spoke up. How about I get us all something to eat? Are you hungry, Izuku? And while Blonde Mane said it, the human slowly stood up on his hind legs. Of course, Blonde Mane was a human. How had he felt less threatened just because the human had sat down? Why had he started comparing them to lions? Humans hurt him. Humans are cruel. What was he thinking? He crouched his body low to the ground like he would while sneaking up on prey and opened his mouth, showing all his teeth and hissed. I dare you to take one step closer. I will attack if you try anything. But then the human stepped back while smiling at him sadly. It's okay, little listener. You're safe here. You'll see. And with that the man opened the door behind himself and left through it, leaving him and Blackmane alone. He was stunned with confusion. Had the threat actually worked? Blondmane hadn't looked scared of him. But Blondmane had looked sad. Was the human sad about the fact he felt the need to threaten him? But that was normal, right? They weren't part of the same pride, so he needed to set boundaries. He had to let other animals know when to back off, showing them he would protect himself and his pride if they didn't. Unless. But that wasn't possible, right? After everything. Did these humans mean for him to become part of their pride? Izuku POV. And then it was just him and Blackmane left in the weird enclosed space. Blackmane wasn't looking directly at him, but he was in the man's field of vision. And then the human did something that stunned him. Blackmane slowly closed and opened his eyes. This was language he understood. But he couldn't do anything with it either way. It didn't matter, the human just gave him a declaration of trust. It wasn't mutual, and he wasn't going to pretend that it was. He looked away instead. He wasn't even sure if the human knew what those signs meant. But even without taking the body language into consideration, he still couldn't find any hostility coming from Blackmane. So instead he looked away to examine the space he was in instead. It was the only way for him to show the human that for the moment he trusted the man wouldn't attack him without telling Blackmane the trust was mutual. But he kept his body in a way that made sure his side was facing the human instead of his front. That way he could jump away and escape more easily than if they stood face to face. It wasn't long until the door opened again. Blondmane came in and he quickly realized the man had something in his. Straight away his defenses were back up. He wouldn't admit he was getting tired. He needed to stay strong so he would be able to protect himself when if the humans decided to hurt him. He hadn't had time to think over his earlier theory yet. He wouldn't be able to until the humans finally left him alone. He needed all his senses to keep a close watch on everything around him as long as they were close, and so he didn't have time to put his thoughts in order. His senses were already dulled in this form, so all his attention needed to be focused on them. When Blondmane stepped inside, bringing the weird flat round-shaped object with golden brown things on top of it along with him, a heavy scent entered along with him. Even with his dulled human senses, this smell was intense. But not in a bad way. He flared his nostrils, hoping to recognize the scent, but as far as he could tell with a human nose, he hadn't encountered it before. Against his will, he was leaning forward towards the humans and the smell that came from the same direction. Blondmane sat down next to Blackmane. I thought it would be best to start out with getting used to cooked meat first. I don't know when the last time he had anything like fruit or vegetables was. And I figured chicken legs would be more easily recognizable as meat even if it isn't raw. Good thinking. I think he likes it too, Blackmane said while glancing in at him. Blondmane looked at him too then. Blackmane still wasn't looking into his eyes, but Blondmane was either trying to intimidate him or he actually didn't know looking into someone's eyes like that was basically the same as threatening them. At this point he thought both options were possible. Humans were clueless after all, but that didn't make them any less dangerous. Any less painful. He involuntarily shuddered. But he locked eyes with the human anyway, ready for the staring contest it would surely result into. Don't look into his eyes. He gets scared if you do that. Right after Blackmane spoke in human, Blondmane looked away, leaving him slightly bewildered. Did he just win a battle of dominance between them? He didn't even know what to do with that information. Blondmane smiled a little when the man saw his expression. He didn't know what it looked like. He couldn't see his own human form beside looking down on his arms and legs after all. Ooh, he's like a scared stray cat, Shoyuda. Blondmane spoke but kept his voice soft like a whisper even if it sounded like the human wanted to make it much louder. The corners of Blackmane's mouth turned upwards just a little. Exactly like that. Would you like some of this, little listener? Blondmane said, now looking at him without looking into his eyes, while holding one of the golden brown things in his hand. Was it attached to some kind of stick? Slowly Blondmane reached his arm forward. The smell got stronger with the piece moving closer to him, and the curiosity won over his fear too. Cringe away from the outstretched arm. Look, Izuku, Blackmane said, causing him to turn his head slightly in his direction. Watching him without his eyes having to move away from the thing in Blondemane's hand. Blackmane seemed satisfied with that while the man moved his hand to grab one of the golden brown things too. The human kept his movements slow and deliberate so that he could follow it all easily without having to take his eyes off Blondemane's outstretched hand. Blackmane then brought the thing to his mouth and bit into it. The way the man ripped a piece off of the thing using his teeth reminded him strongly of tearing meat from a dead animal. Now that he thought about it, the stick looked like bone too. But where was the skin? The hair or feathers? And why did it smell like that? He could no longer deny that he was thoroughly intrigued. Before he could stop himself, his front paw moved a step forward. And his hand. He had to keep reminding himself he didn't have his real body for some reason. Then Blondemane's hand that wasn't holding the meat-like thing out to him, put the flat round thing with the other meat-like things on it down to grab another one and start eating it too. Just like Blackmane was doing. But the other hand stayed still, as far away from Blondemane's body and towards him as possible. What was he meant to do? Was he meant to grab it with his human hands like the two in front of him were doing? He wasn't human though. The lions never liked it when he used his hands for anything. So he would only ever experiment with them when no one was looking. He wasn't about to disrespect his pride now that he was away from them. But he was now also aware of how his stomach was growling. He was hungry. Would it be safe to eat? Last time he ate in his human form he got sick. But these were humans and they were eating it without any problem. His eyes squinted at the humans, who had now stopped looking into his eyes but kept looking in his general direction. They were still being weirdly SBMSSV. Alright then, if they were going to act SBMSSV then he wasn't going to stop them. But that meant that he shouldn't be the one watching them eat. With his mind made up, he pounced forward without warning, swatting the meat out of Blondemane's hand using his own. He decided to ignore the fact that he now had hands or any other human traits for that matter. He wasn't human and they weren't going to make him pretend that he was. Blondemane had let go of the meat and it had flown across the room from the impact his hand had made. He walked over to the piece and took it between his teeth. Then he went back to the object that looked to be made out of branches from trees but then smoother and without any leaves or sticks attached to it. He jumped right on top of it. He laid down on it awkwardly, his toes still touching the wood so that he could jump away if needed, his stomach resting on his knees and elbows as he took the bone between his hands to chew on the meat. He refused to use the fingers and refused to acknowledge it would have been a lot easier to eat if did. He glanced at the humans who were now looking at him with wide eyes. I guess it's progress at least. Blackmane said. Oh my god, did you see that? Blondemane was looking back and forth between him and Blackmane with his mouth hanging open a little. But the human wasn't exposing his teeth so he didn't mind the action too much. Blackmane rolled his eyes. The meat tasted different. He couldn't help but compare it to when he had eaten the buffalo in his human form. The buffalo had tasted off. Not like at any other time he had eaten buffalo. So maybe it was a human thing then. He noticed how the meat he was eating now didn't have any parts he had to eat around except for the bone itself. But he had to do that when eating using his real body anyway, so that was nothing new. But there wasn't leathery skin that his human teeth couldn't tear or muscle he had difficulty ripping off of the dead animal. And the biggest difference was the taste. He reluctantly admitted that this tasted much better than the buffalo had. Even though he hadn't helped catching this animal and didn't have the satisfaction of eating something he worked for, the taste was good enough to make up for that. Too soon the meat was gone and he refocused on the humans who were still watching him. Their eyes were wide but a small smile on both their faces. Let's leave him alone for a little bit, okay? Let him settle in. Blackmane said. And Blondemane nodded. He mimicked the action with his head again. The humans smiled wider before both slowly standing up. I'll leave the plate here, okay Izuku? You can eat as much as you like. Blondemane said while looking at him, still without making eye contact. Making him feel like the human was trying to communicate with him. He wasn't sure why they still tried. He didn't mind though as long as they didn't raise their voices. When they both raised to their full length on their hind legs, he raised his head in suspicion. But he didn't bare his teeth or growl this time. They didn't move towards him. Instead, Black Mane opened the door and they both left the space. Blonde Mane waving his hand a little at him before the man closed the door behind himself. Finally he had time to think. But he was so overwhelmed with everything happening that he wasn't even sure where to start. The humans with manies were making him question everything. He lifted his own hand and waved at the door. He still saw no reason for why Blonde Mane had done it. Maybe it was their way of body language? Their body language didn't make any sense after all. There was no meat left on the bone he was now chewing on, and his eyes found the white round object that held more meat. He slowly got up and jumped off the wooden structure, landing on his hands first before his feet followed. He walked on all fours towards the object. He stared at it for a second before raising his hand and slowly reaching for a piece of meat. He was curious, and it wouldn't do any harm if no one saw him, right? He curled his fingers around one of the bones that was sticking out of the pieces of meat and held it steady while bringing the meat to his lips. He bit into it, and he had to admit that this was so much easier than balancing the bone between his hands. But he would never let the humans see him doing this, even if their manies made them look like lions themselves. He chewed on the meat while holding the bone in one hand while balancing himself on the other and his feet. After a few more bites, he relaxed enough to sit down and let himself enjoy the food. When there were only bones left with no leftover meat, he jumped back on the wooden structure. This time laying down on his side, which was a lot more comfortable in his human form than his earlier position. No longer able to stop the sleepiness, he closed his eyes and dozed off. Third-person POV. Sitting at the kitchen table, Shoyuta and Hizashi had their eyes fixed on their laptop screen. Watching Izuku mimic what he had seen them do earlier before eating and falling asleep on top of his desk through a camera Hizashi had thought to hang in his room. Their arms were around each other's waist and smiles on their face. They would do anything to make their new son happy and trusting again. "I can't believe we have a son," Hizashi said. "Me neither, Hizashi. It's going to be rough, but we'll get through it," Shoyuta told him while still looking at the screen. "Together," Hizashi agreed. Shoyuta looked up from the laptop and locked eyes with his husband. "Together," he agreed. Dadzawa POV. During the night, both Shoyuta and Hizashi had woken up multiple times to check the camera for any signs of Izuku being awake. But the kids slept through the whole night as far as they had seen and was still asleep in the morning when they made breakfast together. Hizashi prepared some leftover chicken for Izuku while Shoyuta prepared something a little more healthy for themselves. When they sat down to eat, they left the chicken in the pan so it would stay warm to bring to Izuku after they had finished eating. "You think we should start teaching Izuku some simple words?" Hizashi asked. "He was mimicking the movements we made once we had left the room yesterday. So maybe he might do the same with words." Shoyuta nodded at the idea. The camera in the kids' room had audio on it too, so they would be able to hear his attempts at Japanese. It would be a good opportunity as well to get an understanding of how much human speech he knew and how long it would take him to learn. "Our names would be a good place to start," Shoyuta replied. "Do you think he remembers his own name?" Hizashi asked then, making Shoyuta frown. Shoyuta thought about how the kid had reacted every time they spoke his name, and there admittedly hadn't been much reaction at all. "I don't think so," he said then. "Well then, we'll just have to teach him that too," Hizashi exclaimed with determination showing on his face. They didn't mention that the kid slept on his desk. That was a problem neither of them was ready to deal with. After they finished breakfast, they fed their cat. It had been a stray that Shoyuta fed occasionally when he was on patrol. He had called him BSRD as the cat tended to nip his fingers if he didn't manage to get the food out of his pockets fast enough. One day the cat had followed him home and he reluctantly let the cat in. He hadn't left since. And even after Hizashi's multiple attempts at trying to rename him, BSRD was still the only name he listened to. Shoyuta wondered how Izuku would react to meeting the cat in the future. When the cat was fed and the kitchen cleaned up, they checked the camera and saw that the kid was finally awake. So they put the chicken on a plate and headed to Izuku's room. Izuku POV. It took a moment to remember where he was when he woke up. He was still alone in this new space and decided it was a good time to explore a little since he didn't have time for that yesterday. First order of business, he decided that he liked this wooden structure he had slept on. And so he decided it was his now. He was still on top of it, so he decided rub his back and head along the top first by rolling on it. He was careful not to fall off though. Then he jumped off of it and proceeded to rub his head along the legs of the thing. With his human nose, Jay still couldn't smell his scent on it no matter how much he rubbed, so he made sure not to miss a spot. Just when he was about to move on to the rest of the room, the door opened. He mourned the missed chance of exploring the rest of the room, but the thought quickly left his mind when two familiar humans entered the room along with the same scent as yesterday. His head snapped to them and then to the round object in Blondemane's hand with more of the meat on it. Oh, he really wanted to get closer to just take it off of him. But his instincts were making him stay on his spot next to his now claimed wooden structure. They both sat down again close to the door like they had before. Blondemane put the round object with the meat on it on the floor between them. That was another thing that confused him. This round thing was a human tool. Human tools hurt. But this thing just held food. It was as strange as the two humans in front of him. Hey little listener, did you sleep well? If you want him to learn his name, you're going to have to start calling him by it. Oh, you're right. Sorry, Izuku. He was kind of amused hearing their chatter again. He liked listening to their voices more than the silence of the space he was in. What? You think you can take it from me with your hand this time, Izuku? Blondemane spoke while holding a piece of meat towards him. He was just about to pounce forward again when the human held the meat away from him. What was this? Was the human not giving it to him? Did he need to challenge Blondemane for it? He stayed in place, not moving forward but staring the man down instead. No, don't swipe it. I'm only giving it to you if you let me hand it to you. Blondemane held the meat towards him again. What kind of game was this? He didn't like it. He carefully took one step forward. This made Blondemane smile. Okay, so he was doing something right then? He was so focused on the meat that he completely forgot he didn't want to appease the humans. He took another step in their direction. Both of them stayed silent and calm. Blondemane's smile got wider the more steps he took, and the human stretched his arm a bit further towards him so the meat got closer. This was the closest he had ever been to a human, but that was the least of his worries. With the meat so close to his face now, the smell was stronger than before and he wanted it. He raised his hand quickly to swipe at the meat. But instead of dropping it, Blondemane pulled his hand back towards himself before his hand could hit the meat out of it. He cursed Blondemane's reflexes. He stared at the man now. He wanted the human to feel his annoyance. But instead of giving in, the man laughed. It didn't scare him this time. He just kept staring at the man, trying not to show confusion instead of annoyance. That could have scared him, you idiot. I can't help it, just look at his face. It's like the face BSRD makes when he gets fed 5 minutes later than his usual time. Blondemane had an amused smile on his face as well. Stupid humans. What was so funny about this situation? Blondemane slowly reached his hand with the meat in it forward again. He wanted to take it. But how was he meant to if the human kept taking it away from him? An idea popped up in his head and he took one more step forward. He hesitantly glanced at Blondemane, who was now silent but still hadn't moved. One more step and then he bit into the meat with his teeth, effectively taking it out of the human's hand, and quickly darted back to his structure. He jumped on top of it and let the meat slide out of his mouth, into his hand. He held it with his fingers wrapped around the bone as he ripped a piece of meat off of it and began chewing it. Too late he realized that he was eating the meat like a human would. He quickly glanced up at the two humans who were still watching him. He stopped chewing and looked at the humans while still holding a piece between his teeth, not caring that it poked out of his lips. Blondemane snorted again and Blondemane said, "It's all right, problem child. You can eat however you want." "Show, that's not fair. If I have to call him by his real name, then so do you." Blondemane rolled his eyes. He is a problem child though. With their attention now focused on each other, he decided to ignore their presence and just eat the meat while holding it in his hand like he was before. "Anyway, did you see how close he got to me? Yeah, he's doing really well." "But you're giving compliments? You must be really proud." He heard Blondemane sigh. While the humans were talking, he had finished eating the meat off of the bone and looked up just in time to see Blackmane roll his eyes. He had seen the man do this before and he wanted to try it too. But he wouldn't until the humans had left. Blondmane looked at him then and Blackmane followed. "Do you want another one, Izuku?" Blackmane spoke up as the man held a piece of meat out towards him. By now he knew what to do and walked up to the human on all fours, slowing down as he got closer. But when he moved his face closer to take meat with his teeth, Blackmane stopped him by pulling the meat away slightly. "Take it with your hand. Like this." The human held up the hand that wasn't holding the meat, and when his attention went to the second hand, the man slowly used that hand to take the piece of meat out of the first. Then the man did the same with the first hand and held it back out towards him. He looked at it confused for a moment before moving his head forward again to take it. Blackmane took the meat away again. He huffed, getting annoyed. "You can do it. Use your hands." When he pulled his head back again, Blackmane moved the meat back forward and held up the second hand, opening and closing it a few times. Did the human want him to take it with his hand? He had an internal battle between how much he wanted the meat and how much he didn't want to pretend to be human in front of these men. But with the meat so close to his face, he eventually gave up and slowly moved his hand towards it. When his fingers curled around the bone, Blackmane let go and he quickly transferred the meat back to his mouth and jumped up on his wooden structure. While chewing happily, he heard Blondmane laugh again and Blackmane said something in human that he couldn't understand with a sigh. But he could almost hear the smile in the sigh. "See, a problem child. Oh come on, show Yuta, that was adorable." It went like that until all the meat pieces that were on the flat round object were gone. At that point the humans were still in the same space as him and he wasn't sure what to do until Blackmane's hand came up. The man pointed the fingers of the hand to his own chest and spoke up. "Show Yuta." "Show." Then Blackmane pulled the hand away from his own chest and pointed one finger towards Blondmane. "Izashi. Hi Zaisher." Then Blackmane pointed the finger towards him. "Izuku. Izuku." He tilted his head. What was the man trying to do? But then Blondmane did the same thing. Except the man started with himself repeating, "Hizashi." Then went to Blackmane. "Show Yuta." And then to him. "Izuku." Well, it looks like the humans broke. He huffed. Why couldn't humans just make sense for once? "You think you can repeat that, Izuku?" Blondmane said while looking at him. He recognized the word Izuku this time, but he had no idea what it meant. But Blondmane continued talking then. "Show Yuta." The man pointed towards Blackmane. "And Hizashi," the human pointed towards his own chest. "Would be really happy if you learned our names." It took him a few moments, but then it clicked. Were they really trying to teach him human language? But that was impossible for an animal, right? He wasn't even sure he could make sounds like that. If you teach him to talk in third person, you will be sleeping on the couch for the rest of your life. Blondmane laughed at Blackmane's words. And he realized how he kind of wanted to know what he was laughing about. Blondmane laughed a lot though. But still, was there a chance that maybe he could learn? That he could understand? He remembered wanting to learn and to understand human language when he was still with his pride. But that had been different, hadn't it? Back then there had been a safe distance between him and the humans. Now he was in a closed space with them. Now they wanted him to act human. And he didn't want that. Right? Izuku POV. It took a while before he understood that Shoyuta meant humans with black manis and Hizashi meant humans with blonde manis. The other word they kept saying while pointing at him must mean lion then. He wasn't sure if he could actually say the words himself. He had never tried to mimic human words before, but the Shoyuta and the Hizashi kept repeating it slowly quite a few times now, so at least he was sure that he could try. He decided to try once the humans had already left though. He was still too conflicted with himself to try it in front of them. He didn't want these humans to get the wrong idea after all. But for now he was pretty proud of himself for already knowing 3 human words. It was so different from the language he was used to. These words were actually used to describe something instead of sending a message like, back off, or, I trust you. So when the humans finally left him alone, he gave it a try. He started with lion because he liked that word the best. The humans kept saying it in 3 parts. Zu and ku. He tried to think of sounds he already knew how to make and which ones sounded close to the sounds the humans made. He wasn't sure if he could manage I on its own, but is sounded close to a his, so he tried that first. Hi-ish. Close enough. On to the next part. Oh, it was a bit like a cough, wasn't it? Maybe more like a hiccup. Yuku. That was close. Maybe if he tried to shorten it, it might sound better. He decided to try. That sounded almost the exact same as how the humans said it. Now all that was left was to connect it. Hishiku, he pronounced it slowly. He got pretty close, but he knew it wasn't the same. Would it be easier if he let the humans help? He didn't even really want to consider it. He wanted to do it on his own. Besides, if the humans knew he was trying to learn their language, they might think he wanted to be part of them. Would that be such a bad thing though? The Shoyuda and the Hizashi hadn't hurt him so far. But they might still do so. They were humans after all. And if there's one thing he learned from his time with humans, it was that humans hurt. Humans had tools and they used them to hit him, to cut him, to shock him until he couldn't move. Were these lion-looking humans really different? Not one human he had met before had long manes like these two. So maybe they were different. But could he afford to take a chance like that? What if they wanted to do something worse? What could be worse though? He didn't even want to think about that. But he was sure humans could do worse. He couldn't get attached. Not to the Shoyuda and the Hizashi, and not to the idea of humans not hurting. He would just get disappointed. He would just get hurt. Like how humans gave him weird-smelling food that made him feel like he was getting eaten alive from the inside. That left him coughing and throwing up, and he didn't want to think about that anymore. But then why was he even trying to learn? Why did he want to understand them so badly? He would never be one of them. He wouldn't let them make him be one of them. No matter what his body looked like. Was that why they were keeping him here? To make him a human too? He wouldn't let them. The only ones he could trust were lions. He realized how much he missed his pride. He would have been safe with them if he hadn't been stupid and tried to eat prey in his human form. He wanted to go back. Was there a way to get back to the pride? He suddenly realized what he needed to do. He would learn human language. Not to speak, but he needed to understand. He would learn and he would find a way out of here and back to his family. Even if he had to become a nomad or start his own pride, it would be fine. At least he knew he could trust others of his kind. Dadzawa POV. They had never thought it would be an easy process to teach Izuku how to speak. But they had still probably underestimated the situation. Hearing Izuku try to say his own name, both Shoyuda and Hizashi had been watching the screen with wide eyes. Hizashi more obvious with his expressions than Shoyuda, of course. From where the kid was sitting, they had a perfect view of his face. And they could see him struggle. They could see the enthusiasm when he started, but when it suddenly got replaced by pain and hopelessness instead, their mood had quickly dropped. And after his first try, the kid had given up. And he didn't look like he wanted to try again. Hizashi's hand had grabbed Shuda's and squeezed it tightly. His husband probably understood Izuku more than he could. After all, Hizashi had been mute for a short time when his quirk came in and he had accidentally damaged his family's hearing, including his own. Maybe we could teach him sign language. That might be easier for him. The blonde suggested. Maybe. He doesn't seem comfortable using his hands too much either though. Shoyuda thought out loud. How about we first make sure he understands us, then? He can start speaking whenever he is ready. Hizashi nodded and he looked a bit happier at the idea. That's a great idea. Shoyuda ruffled the blonde hair a little while he stood up. Let's make the kid some lunch first, yeah? What kind of meat do you want to introduce him to next? Hizashi brightened and went through all the options out loud. Izuku POV. The humans were back. But now he saw them in a different light. He watched them closely as they entered with the flat round food tool they kept bringing him meat on. There was something different on it this time though. It smelled edible just like the other meat had, but he didn't trust it. It wasn't until the Hizashi took a bite himself to show him it was safe to eat that he tried it too. Just like the other meat they had given him, it tasted amazing. He wouldn't let it show though. Or at least he tried to. He used his fingers and hands because it was just more convenient in this form. Not because he was pretending to be human. It would just take too long to eat if he kept it between his hands as if they were paws to rip off a piece with his teeth. It seemed like he was in luck though. After eating, the Shoyuda and the Hizashi tried to teach him more human words. He needed to know every word he could remember, only so he could understand what they were talking about and use the knowledge to escape. That was definitely the only reason. They first stayed on their spot on the ground and pointed things out from where they were. There was no way he could remember all the words as there turned out to be so many, but he tried to remember as many as possible. The Shoyuda had started with the Hizashi. It turned out there were a lot of words to describe the human's features. He had no idea why anyone would need all these words for them, but he tried to remember anyway. The Shoyuda touched the Hizashi's manis. Hair, the human said while looking at him. It was obvious what he wanted. He wanted him to say it right? Well, that wasn't happening. They could get the thought of him being human out of their heads. Then the Shoyuda touched the Hizashi's nose, making the Hizashi giggle a little. Nose, the Shoyuda said. And it just kept going. At some point the Shoyuda stood up and slowly walked around the room. He touched a fabric thing blanket, a smaller but thicker fabric thing pillow. There was no stop to it. Humans seem to have words for literally everything. It's not like he was fascinated with it or anything. No, he definitely wasn't. And he wasn't curious about what other kind of words they had either. Like if they also had words for different kinds of lions, or if they had words for how old a lion was. Or words for what time of the year it was when the sun went under sooner and came up later. Or if they had words for the different colors of the birds in the sky, or when there was this colorful stripe in the sky, did that have a word? And did the different colors in it all have a name? Did the sky have words to describe it to? Like if there are lots of clouds or when water falls from it. He just needed to know. To escape. He needed to know so he could escape. That was all. The Hizashi watched the other man with a smile on his face while the Shoyuda kept giving him more words. At some point the Hizashi spoke up. Maybe that's enough for Izuku today. Do you think we should leave him to think about it for a little bit? The Shoyuda nodded his head. Yeah, you're right. It's probably a lot already. We could order some cards with pictures of different things to help teach him as well. That's a good idea actually. All right, Izuku, we'll come back later, okay? He was a little disappointed that beside the word for line, he still couldn't understand what they were saying. But the humans seemed content to keep teaching him, so he didn't want to lose hope just yet. It didn't take long after that for the humans to leave. He took this time alone to go over all the words in his head. Realizing just how many he had forgotten already annoyed him. But at least he knew the most important ones. Like how his wooden structure was called a desk. And the opening they kept leaving out of was a door. The humans had left by pushing down the door handle, and the door had opened. He waited for a little bit after the humans left until he walked up to the door on all fours. He leaned up on his knees while holding himself steady with one hand and used the other to push down the door handle. The door didn't open. He wasn't sure if he was more confused or annoyed at it. He tried scratching the door and biting the door handle and quickly got frustrated at how weak his human features were. He might have been able to break through it with his real body, but this was useless. Instead, he focused his attention on something else. He hadn't noticed it before the Shoyuda pointed it out. There was a see-through screen in the wall that kept him inside the space. The Shoyuda had called it a window. And if he stood on the thing that was called a bed, he could see the outside through it. Maybe he could use this window to get outside. From his position on the ground, he could only see the blue sky. But if he jumped on the bed, he would have a full view. So he climbed on the bed, which was a lot softer than he thought it would be, and stared out of the window for a couple seconds before he realized what he was seeing. He was so high up. How did he even get so high up? The ground was far below him, and he knew he couldn't climb walls like that. Could humans climb that high? He could climb trees when he had his real body, even with parts of prey in his mouth. But could they really have carried him up like that? His plan to use the window to escape was now forgotten. There was no way he would survive a fall like that anyway. But he stayed there, watching the outside for a long time. He could see birds he had never seen before. He only stopped watching when the door opened and the humans entered. Again. The word teaching continued, but it was mostly a repeat of the words they had already gone through. And this time it was the Hizashi that pointed things out and told him the name of them. They also brought him more food. Wasn't this the third time today he had eaten? He wasn't sure how and why he was hungry right around the time they offered him food as well. Could it be a human thing? The first humans that fed him before he got taken here also fed him every day with smaller portions than he was used to. But now the portions were even smaller and 3 times a day. It was a weird thing to get used to. He learned that he got the food right away if he took it with his hands instead of hitting it away from them first or even grabbing it from them with his teeth. He didn't understand why they insisted on it, but at least it wasn't too bad. Like, imagine them forcing him to stand on his hind legs before giving him the food. They left when the sun lowered and the sky he could see through the window turned dark. Then he climbed back on the desk to sleep. It was weird how his sleep schedule had changed. Normally he would be awake when it was nighttime. But he couldn't go to sleep if the humans were watching him, and they were always there during the day. He didn't like that this was yet another human trait that was forced upon him. At least he got the chance to learn more human words while he was here. So he could use them to escape, of course. With my eyes, the Shoyuda pointed with 2 fingers to his eyes. I can see Izuku. The man pointed at him. I can also see Hizashi. The man then pointed at the Hizashi. And I see the bed. And to the bed. And I can see the desk. And finally he pointed to his desk. It took a while for him to understand what was happening. They were using more words now instead of only one to describe an object like before. Then the Hizashi closed his eyes. And now I cannot see. The man giggled a little again. The Shoyuda sighed and the Hizashi opened his eyes again. Yes, when Hizashi closes his eyes, he cannot see. And when I close my eyes, I cannot see. The Shoyuda closed his eyes too. Now my eyes are closed. Then the human opened his eyes again. And now my eyes are open. Oh, I know one like that. The Hizashi said excitedly, and the man moved to open the door by pushing the door handle down. Much to his frustration. Why could the humans do it but he couldn't? It didn't seem that difficult. Now the door is open. And then the man closed the door again. And now the door is closed. The Shoyuda smiled at the human with the blonde manis. That is a good one, Hizashi. Do we have more things to open and close? The Hizashi seemed to think for a second before lifting a finger and quickly exiting the space through the door. The door opened again soon after though, and the human sat back down, but this time with a human tool in his hands. He frowned. He didn't like human tools. This is it. Box. The Hizashi lifted 2 flaps on the top up and he could see it was empty inside. Now the box is open. Then the Hizashi put the flaps back down so he could no longer see the inside. And now the box is closed. He could see the trend in the words. There were still a lot, but they were sort of starting to make sense. Really? You couldn't find anything better than a box. The cat likes boxes. So Izuku might too. The Shoyuda brought the palm of his hand to his forehead and shook his head. It went on for a couple of days and he got pretty confident that he could understand parts of the conversations between the humans. As soon as he was able to pick up on some of the words, others started making sense. It was weird. It felt sort of familiar, even though it couldn't have been. He had never spoken human language before, and beside the occasional human group that came to observe his pride, he had never heard humans converse. But he wouldn't complain even if it felt strange. It made things easier. He had also come to understand a few human gestures that they used to communicate. Like as a greeting or as a way of saying goodbye, they waved their hand. To agree with something, they nod their head up and down, which is sometimes combined with the word yes. Or I in the Hizashi's case. When disagreeing with something, they shook their head from left to right, which was sometimes combined with the word no. Or nope in the Hizashi's case. After some pining over it, he decided it would be okay to start using the gestures. Just to make his life easier. Not because he wanted to be like the humans. The humans sat in the space with him again when the Shoyuda looked at him and asked, "Would you like to see the rest of the apartment?" At the confused look he probably gave the human, Hizashi spoke up. "Do you understand, Izuku?" And for the first time after his decision to use the human gestures, he shook his head. The humans just looked at him with wide eyes. "Oh my God! Izuku! Well done!" The Hizashi said and then looked at the Shoyuda. "See? I told you he understands more than we thought. He still didn't understand all the words, but it wasn't hard to fill in the blanks. And he made sure to remember what the words were for if he heard them again later. Yeah, I guess you were right. Like with this sentence. A lot of these words were never explained, but many of them were said so often that he kind of just figured out what they meant. But usually when the words were in this order and combination with each other, it would be the Hizashi that said them to the Shoyuda. And that feeling of familiarity helped too. Sometimes he only had to hear a word once and it just clicked in his head. Again, strange but helpful. Let's just show him. Are you coming, Izuku? This time he couldn't really figure it out on his own. But when the humans both stood up, opened the door and turned around like they were waiting for him, he understood. So, coming meant to follow. He tested it out by getting on all fours and slowly walking towards the door as well. When the Shoyuda frowned, he first wondered if he had gotten it wrong, but then the man said, "It would be good to learn how to walk on two legs as well." He couldn't help himself. He snorted. Yeah, there was no way that was happening. Stupid humans. But instead of getting angry at him, the Shoyuda raised his eyebrows and the Hizashi laughed loudly. "I don't think he agrees with you, Sho." The Shoyuda just huffed. And then they walked on, looking over their shoulder to check if he was still following. Which he was. This was the first time he had ever been through the door. He looked around, taking in every detail he could see. It was nice to see where the humans would disappear to when they went through the door. Is this where they caught the food they brought? Was this where they slept? It was like a den but very different. Why did they have so many things and what did they use them for? So many structures he had never seen before, some that looked more like a desk and some that looked more like a bed. There were also pillows here on a different structure that reminded him more of a bed, and there were things that looked like the chair in his space. He wanted to see it all and to know what it all was. So he could escape later. He wasn't sure when yet, but he was sure that that was what he wanted the information for. And then the words game started again. There were so many new words in this space. The Hizashi gestured around with his arms. "This is the living room," the human started. And then he started pointing out all kinds of things. "This is a table. And this is the couch. This is a TV. I cannot wait to show you all kinds of TV shows and movies." "I think it's a little soon for that, Hizashi." The Shoyuda cut in. "Yeah, I know. Anyway, this is a picture. Look, it's of Shoyuda and me." The Hizashi held up a piece of paper. On it were both of the humans and they looked so real. He was fascinated by it, watching the flat, unmoving humans on the paper as if waiting for them to come alive. But then a creature walked in. It was like a lion but really small, smaller than a cub. The picture was instantly forgotten as he watched the animal. "Oh, and that is BC," the Hizashi said. He watched as the BSTRD came towards him, relieved that he could read this creature's body language perfectly. The BSTRD wasn't hostile. It came to greet him without a sign of aggression, and he decided he likes the BSTRD. He put his head down and let the BSTRD rub its head against his. The BSE made a funny meowing noise that he knew he had no chance of being able to return. "It looks like BSTRD has a new favorite," the Shoyuda said with an amused voice. "This is so cute though. Shoyuda, are you seeing this? Look at them rubbing their heads together. Oh my god, where is my phone? I need pictures." He didn't pay them any mind. Just enjoying his greeting with the BSTRD. From then on, the humans took him out of his space, which was apparently called his bedroom, every day. First for short amounts of time while showing him more rooms every time, and eventually, he was allowed to go where he wanted. Well, until the sun went down, then he had to stay in his room again to sleep. But he didn't mind that. He liked sleeping on the desk. After a couple of days, he could understand the human language quite well. There weren't that many words that he didn't know the meaning of anymore. Luckily, the humans didn't push him to speak, nor did they push him to do anything he wasn't comfortable with. Until they did. All you have to do is stand up and you can reach it. The Shoyuda, the stupid human, held a piece of meat too high for him to reach. He tried jumping at it, but the human just held it higher if he did. He was now staring at it for what felt like a very long time, willing the man's patience to come to an end and just give him the meat already. He then looks at the Shoyuda now instead of the meat. Looking him straight in the eyes, "You can't make me," he says with his body language. When suddenly, The human slow blinks at him. And he wasn't sure how and when it happened, maybe after the human taught him a whole new language and fed him every day and always approached him slowly and gave him food and always looks at him fondly and… Okay, maybe he did at least know why it happened. He blinked back. I trust you. Stunning both the Shoyuda and himself. Neither of them had expected it. But instead of it making him freeze, he let his weight shift backwards a little, taking courage out of the trust the human gave him, the trust he now felt able to return. And he stood. Well, as far as standing goes, he didn't even rise to his full length, knees still bent and wobbling, and before he managed to grab the food he fell back down. It was the first time either of the humans moved that fast and unpredictable around him when somehow the Shoyuda caught him by his arm with one hand while the other still held onto the food. Even if the hand was firm around his arm, it was also steadying him, it didn't hurt and it was warm. He hadn't realized how much he missed the warm touch of another person until now. He let the hand guide him upwards, still not all the way, but a lot further than before. And then the Shoyuda gave him the meat. Nodding at him encouragingly. He took it and carefully bit into it, not wanting to move too much in case he would fall. Once he had eaten the meat, the Shoyuda carefully let him back down to the ground where he dropped back on all fours again. And for the first time in his life, it felt wrong. It felt wrong to use his hands to walk. But before he could ponder on that thought more, the Hizashi was clapping loudly. Something the man had started doing lately whenever he did something the man thought was good and praiseworthy? He wasn't sure why clapping your hands together was used as praise, but for some reason, every time the man did it, he felt this warmth inside his chest. There was only one other thing that gave him the same warmth, even before he understood the words, they gave him that warm feeling. Well done, Izuku. We're proud of you. The Shoyuda said with a small smile on his lips. Those words. He copied the smile on the Shuda's face. And then he pushed himself back up. Instantly the man's hand held his arm again, but the human didn't squeeze or guide him. It was just there to reassure him that he would be caught if he fell. So he straightened his knees. Seeing the world from this new height, with a warm hand on his arm to keep him up, with a cheering voice in the background. It felt like he belonged. After the first time he stood up on two legs, he had a goal in mind. He wasn't sure why he wanted to learn, but it just felt right. He wanted to learn how to walk. And luckily the humans seemed all too happy to help him learn. They didn't push him, not that they would have needed to. Because apparently, once he had his mind on something, he wouldn't back down. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had a goal. He wasn't even sure what that goal was beside just standing up and walking. But he was determined to reach it. Maybe it was so that he could run away more easily? So that he could blend in with the humans? They wouldn't notice that he was actually just trying to get back to his pride. But that reason didn't feel right anymore. Did he still even want to go back to his old pride? They would have cast him out soon anyway so that he could find his own. Maybe this was his own? Was this his new pride? Did a lion with human traits fit in with the humans with lion traits? For now, he decided he didn't really care all that much. He felt sort of. And he wasn't sure if that was a good or a bad thing. The Hizashi held his arm while he slowly tried to lift one leg in order to put it back down in front of the other. At first, the man had tried to hold his hand, but he didn't feel comfortable with the skin-to-skin contact just yet. It was easier to pretend that the sleeve of his shirt was fur instead of fabric. Having so much skin was still weird even though most of it was covered in fabric all the time. The humans had helped him change the clothes at first, and even now that he can do it himself, it was still something he didn't think he would ever get used to. He remembered thinking it would hurt to have the new fur pulled off of him and being confused at how it didn't. The only thing he did like about changing clothes was that he could choose the colors he wanted to wear. Even with the hand holding his arm to keep him steady, it felt almost impossible to balance on one foot. Until he realized he didn't have to. He could lean forward just a little before quickly moving the foot in front of the other. He wobbled a bit, but he didn't have to rely on the Hizashi to keep him standing. Going by the smile on the human's face, the Hizashi would probably be clapping if he wasn't holding him with one hand. Well done, Izuku. You'll be walking in no time. And then he turned to look at the Shoyuda. Did you see that show? He just took his first step. The Shoyuda rolled his eyes, but the man looked proud as well. which made him happy. The Shoyuda was still a lot more difficult to read than the Hizashi was, but after spending so much time with both humans, he found they actually did use some body language. They didn't seem to be aware of it though. Like right now, the Shoyuda sat up just a little bit straighter, his chin was lifted a bit higher than it normally was, and by looking at the human's hands which were twitching a tiny bit of his direction, he could see concern as well. But it was still obvious the man trusted the Hizashi enough not to let him fall. You know, my quirk literally requires me to keep my eyes on people, right? You really think I wouldn't be able to pay attention to our son taking his first steps? That word was new. Quirk? He wondered what that meant as he gathered the courage to take another step. They also had been calling him their son sometimes. He figured it was a word for a pride member, but it must work differently than in the Lion's Pride because they called each other husbands. So maybe son was a word for a new pride member and husband could be used for the members that had been there for longer? He wasn't sure. But he didn't doubt he would figure it out at some point. Oh, you know what I mean. The Hizashi laughed. He slowly let his second foot slide to meet the first and then attempted another step. It turned out to be easier than the first. And from there on, he just kept walking, getting more confidence in his balance with each step, still wobbling and sliding. But when he was unsure, all he needed to do was look at the humans' faces and he could see how well they thought he was doing. It didn't take long for him to get tired though, and luckily the Shoyuda announced it was lunchtime. They made him sit at the table now. He wouldn't sit like them with their legs under the table and straight up. That didn't feel right. Instead, he sat with his knees cropped up towards his chest while he ate. The humans luckily didn't seem to mind. I have to go to a teacher's meeting at UA in a couple of days. You will be okay watching him by yourself, right? The Shoyuda spoke up. It's not like he needed a babysitter. Stupid humans. Although, he didn't like the thought of being left alone either. So he wouldn't make a noise of complaint like he kind of wanted to. Yeah, I will be fine. Have you spoken to Nedzu yet about how we're going to manage Izuku once we're both teaching? There was that word again. Teaching and teachers. They must be different versions of the same word like most of the other words he had learned. Even now that he could understand the words he still hadn't properly figured out what version to use when. He wondered if he was going to get an explanation for what it was. Because obviously he would not be using human language to ask for it. He wasn't human after all. Well, it's not like he will be caught up with the first-year students in just a couple weeks' time. Nedzu offered to make him his personal student, but I would like to keep the rat as far away from him as possible. It was strange how many new words there were in this conversation. Normally he didn't have this much trouble keeping up. But he felt like he was completely missing the point. The Hizashi frowned. Apparently, neither of them liked the rat. Maybe it was a painful tool? He should probably stay away from it too in that case. No, I get what you mean. Can he not just stay with one of us? I guess that should be possible. I will bring it up at the meeting. That seemed to be the end of the conversation and they ate in silence. He noticed how his food looked different than what the others ate, but after looking at what was on their plates once and seeing it was green, he didn't want to even attempt to eat it too. Meat isn't supposed to be green. The next couple of days he spent learning how to walk as often as he could. He got to the point where he could confidently say that he had it down. He hadn't tried picking up the pace, but that wasn't the point. He didn't have to be held by his arm anymore to keep him from falling. And then there was a change in routine. He didn't like it. The Shoyuda left. Through the door. Not just the room door, but the whole apartment's door. The Shoyuda pulled it shut behind himself with a small wave and he was just gone. He didn't know if he was coming back. There was just the Hizashi with him now, but there was no way this was safe, right? Strength comes in numbers and the Shoyuda just went away all on his own. Not that he got attached to the human. The man was just an important pride member. The point was he needed him. The Hizashi didn't seem stressed, like this was normal. But there was no way this was normal or safe. And so, his plan got set into action. It wasn't exactly how he had envisioned it. Yes, he wanted to escape to get back to his pride before. But now he was no longer trying to get back to his lion pride. It was still the same reason even if the perspective changed though. He wasn't escaping to get back to his pride, he was escaping to bring his pride back. So when he heard the telltale sound of water running in the bathroom, he knew the Hizashi wouldn't be coming out for some time. Normally this would be fine. Sometimes the Shoyuda was asleep when the Hizashi was in this little room called an office, and he would be alone in the living room. But then, there wasn't a Pride member who needed his help, and he couldn't just sit down and do nothing. So he walked up to the door on 2 legs and pushed down the door handle. To his amazement, the door opened after the handle was pushed all the way down. He had tried to open this door before, but it always stayed closed. Maybe because the Shoyuda had to take the magic off of it in order to walk through it himself? He stood there, 1 step away from leaving the apartment, and took in his surroundings. He didn't have much time though. He needed to catch up with the Shoyuda after all. He tried inhaling as much air as he could through his nose. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't smell anything like he could in his real body. He couldn't smell which way the Shoyuda had gone. He tried to shift to his real body again, but it still didn't work. No matter how much he pulled the mental string, it wouldn't give in. But maybe he took a step. And now that he was officially outside of the apartment, he tried again. But still, nothing happened. That must mean that him being stuck as a human wasn't the apartment's fault. Well, he guessed he could just do it the hard way. He was lucky he had spent so much time learning how to walk because he was going to need it now. He looked left and right. The right was a dead end, so he went left. He passed many doors just like the one he came from. They were all closed though. Should he have closed the door behind himself too? He decided it didn't matter, he would be bringing back the Shoyuda soon enough anyway. So he made his way through the hallway until the ground suddenly started going down in steps. The floor circled around itself as it went down. He could do this. There was a railing on the side of the steps, which he held onto tightly as he kept walking down step by step. He kept all his attention on his feet in order not to trip. So he didn't notice when he finally got closer to the end of the steps until he only had 1 more to go. He sighed in relief. He took in his surroundings. He stood in a big room with couches and a few small tables, and there was 1 other person there who was looking at him strangely. There was also a door, made out of glass just like the windows in their apartment were. And through the glass, he saw the outside. A very different outside than he was used to, but outside was outside. The Shoyuda must have gone through those doors. So he walked over to them as well. To his amazement, these doors just opened without him even touching them. He had to blink a few times to process what just happened, but then pushed himself forward. Every second he hesitated, the Shoyuda just got further away from him. So he walked out. Okay, he might have underestimated just how many options of where to go there would be. But then he saw those big animals the humans always had with them when they followed his last pride. Not just 1, but so many, too many to count. And they came in all different shapes and sizes. Don't get distracted, he told himself. He walked away from the animals. He didn't want to get close as he didn't trust they wouldn't hurt him. Luckily, he found a narrow path to walk, and then another. And another, and another. Left, right, left. So he might have lost track of where he was at this point. But that was fine, he would find the Shoyuda soon and they would find their way back together. But it wasn't long until his legs got tired, not used to walking on only 2 of them for this long. He wanted to sit down to eat meat together with the Shoyuda and the Hizashi. He would need the Shoyuda first. His steps just kept getting slower and the paths kept getting darker and more narrow. He didn't even notice when his legs stopped moving and he leaned into the wall of a building instead. That was until there was a muffled scream. Now, he had never heard humans scream out of distress before. But it was easy to tell a cry for help from any animal, even from humans. He didn't know what possessed him, with his weak human body, his tired legs, his limited knowledge of human things, but he needed to help. And so he started walking as fast as he could, watching his feet as he did so. He only looked up so now and then to make sure he wouldn't run into a wall. It wasn't long until he found where the scream had come from. On the ground was a small human, just a little bit bigger than him, with more fear in his eyes than he had ever seen on a human before. In front of the human stood 3 other even bigger humans, still not as big as the Shoyuda and the Hizashi though. They were kicking the slightly smaller human with their legs. He was pretty sure that was not what legs were made for, but he wasn't even surprised with the cruelty of humans. Of course they would even hurt their own. He noticed the hair of the smaller human. It was purple, but it was wild and stood in every direction. Like the hair of a young lion, Not mature enough to grow it long enough for it to naturally hang downwards. Another lion-like human then. That must be the reason they were hurting the purple mane. He remembered what not lion-like humans had done to him, how angry the Shoyuda looked at the people who had hurt him even if the man didn't know just what had happened exactly. It wasn't fair. Lions were better than humans, so even lion humans deserve better than this. Without thinking about it, he charged the humans in the only way he knew how. He bit and he scratched wherever he could. His arms were so different than a lion's front legs, which made them move awkwardly, and he noticed his elbows kept hitting the humans too, and every time they grunted in pain. What the F is wrong with this kid? He effing bit me. My arm is bleeding. It didn't take too long before he heard one of them say, "Let's get out of here, this kid is completely nuts." And they all ran off, leaving him alone with Purple Mane, who stared at him with wide eyes. Why? Why did you do that? Purple Mane asked. He wanted to answer he really did. But it would mean he was human. Maybe he could even scare Purple Mane off if he talked like a human after what those real humans did to Purple Mane. And with this in mind, he was very confused when the exact opposite happened. Oh, of course you're not gonna answer me. How did you even find out about my quirk, huh? Were you just gonna finish what they started? Purple Mane looked angry. Why would he be angry? What was he supposed to have found out about? Purple Mane looked hurt and betrayed and scared. Was Purple Mane scared of him? Because he wasn't talking human? But the human just got hurt. He couldn't be scaring Purple Mane as well now. He just had to talk. Speak. Speak human. Okay, he could do this. He's heard plenty, he knows what it means and has gotten used to the sounds enough to be able to mimic it, right? He can do this. Here we go. Just word for word. Speak dash, he choked out and took a deep breath for the next word. He didn't notice Purple Mane staring at him strangely now. Is dash, okay, just one more. Hard. He wasn't sure if he was able to put the words in the right order and if he used the right versions of the different words, but at the very least he knew that these were ones he needed. So Purple Mane should be able to figure it out, right? Oh, maybe he should explain why speaking was hard for him as well. Izuku. There, now the human knew he was actually a lion. That should explain enough, right? It seemed to do the trick well enough. Purple Mane tilted his head to the side. He still seemed confused but no longer scared or hurt. It's okay. I'm Shinso. Purple Mane told him. Shinso POV. So the last thing Hitoshi thought would happen when getting the sheet kicked out of him by some upperclassmen was a kid, about his age, jumping his attackers out of nowhere to start biting them. Biting. The green-haired boy actually managed to scare his attackers off as well. He really hoped he only imagined seeing blood on one of their arms where the kid had bitten. But all he could think about was, why? Why would a kid, smaller than him, protect some random stranger from three guys who were obviously a lot stronger? Did he have no self-preservation? Probably not. When he asked why the boy had saved him and the boy didn't answer, his first thought was that he must know about his quirk. Oh, of course you're not gonna answer me. How did you even find out about my quirk, huh? Were you just gonna finish what they started? But then he heard the words that came from the boy's mouth. It sounded like he hadn't spoken in ages. Speak. Is. Hard. He sounded like how Hitoshi himself sounded after he had been muzzled for days at his last foster home, only being allowed to take it off to eat as long as he didn't say a word. Which wasn't even guaranteed to happen daily. Then the second thing he noticed was the boy's long, messy hair, his loose clothes, his lack of shoes, and then there was a bracelet on the boy's wrist. Of course he recognized it right away. Before finally finding a non-abusive home with his current fosters, he had been forced on quirk suppressants for as long as he could remember. He had had them in all shapes and sizes, and this bracelet was definitely one of them. So adding up all those factors, it wasn't hard to draw conclusions. Thank you for helping me, he decided to start with. Hitoshi knew that if anyone had bothered to ask about his own home life before, he would have cut off that conversation as quickly as it started. The boy, Izuku, apparently smiled. You are welcome, Izuku said. He really wasn't used to speaking, was he? That was definitely worrying. Can I help you too? Hitoshi pointed at the bracelet. I might be able to get it off. I have. He hesitated before he decided. Experience. Izuku lifted his arm to look at the bracelet. He stared at it in confusion before looking at Hitoshi again. Why? He asked. To stop it from suppressing your quirk. Hitoshi explained. But the boy still didn't seem to know what he was talking about. What is quirk? He asked eventually. Did he want to know Hitoshi's quirk? He really didn't want to share that with anyone if he didn't have to. People tended to either avoid him or beat him up after finding out. But then again, they were in the same boat. Izuku must have a villainous quirk as well if he was wearing quirk suppressors, right? So maybe he would understand? You want to know what my quirk is? He decided to ask, and then Izuku looked even more confused. No. The green-haired boy tilted his head in thought. What? The quirk? Was he serious? He didn't even know what quirks were? Was Izuku not allowed outside or something? This situation was way worse than he had originally thought. It's like a superpower. Almost everyone has one. I could. Take it off and we can find out what yours is together. Superpower? Izuku questioned. Okay, new strategy. He needed to get this kid out of this dark alleyway and somewhere safe where his guardians couldn't find him. He hated adults. He made a mental note to beat up Izuku's guardians if he ever came across them. Let's get out of here first, okay? I have some tools at home to get that thing off of you anyway. We'll find out what your quirk is together, okay? He stood up and took a few stiff steps in the direction that would lead back to the main street and out of the alleyway. Then he turned around and gave Izuku a questioning look, as if to say, "Are you coming?" Izuku blinked at him a couple of times before slowly following him. Is it okay if I call my mom to let her know I'm bringing someone over? He asked as they slowly made their way towards the direction of his house. Yeah, she's nice, don't worry, she won't mind. He had actually been waiting for the moment she and her husband would muzzle him or yell at him or tell him not to talk, but he had now lived with them for almost half a year and it still hadn't happened. So he was slowly starting to hope that it never would. He just hoped he could trust they were actually okay with him bringing someone over. For both their sakes. Okay, Izuku said. He took his phone out of his pocket and dialed his mom's number. Hey mom, is it okay if I, bring someone over? He asked as soon as she picked up the phone. Of course you can. I'm so glad you made a friend. She told him with enthusiasm. He still wasn't 100% sure it wasn't fake. He wasn't sure if he could ever be though, after all the shit he had been through with fake but foster families. Alright, thanks, we'll be home in about 10 minutes. He told her, and she offered to make them some lunch, which he respectfully declined. If Izuku's situation was as bad as he thought it was, the green-haired boy probably wouldn't be comfortable in the presence of an adult. They walked to his house in silence. He noticed Izuku looking around himself with wide eyes the entire time. It was almost like he hadn't been outside in a long time, which didn't even seem that unlikely with Hitoshi's current theories. Izuku probably wasn't allowed outside often, if at all. The boy was also dragging his feet, almost losing his balance a couple of times, which made him worry if he ate enough. He didn't look like he was starved often, but then again, you never know. When he unlocked the door to his house and let Izuku enter, he heard his mother call out from somewhere inside, but he didn't pay attention to her words. He just raised his voice a little so that she could hear him as he said, "We're just going to my room." He wouldn't yell inside the house, not wanting his talking privileges to get revoked. Even if his new foster parents never made a rule about yelling, he wasn't taking the risk. Okay. Let me know if you need me, his mother replied. He took Izuku, who was still taking in every detail of his surroundings, to his own room, and once they got there he closed the door behind them. The first order of business was taking off that stupid quirk suppressor. He started rummaging through one of his drawers to find the tools he needed to get it off. He always kept them close just in case. He hadn't told anyone about having them and always kept them hidden away as he didn't want them to be taken away from him. When he found what he was looking for, he approached Izuku again. The boy was looking at the tools in his hands with big fearful eyes, and immediately Hitoshi put the tools on the floor in between them and sat down a bit away from them so that they were just out of his reach. I won't hurt you, I promise. He told Izuku. You want to try it yourself? I don't know if I can explain it properly, but we can try. The green-haired boy kept his eyes on the tools for a few more seconds before looking back at him. He saw how the boy studied him. The green eyes traveled from his eyes to his hands and the rest of his body, likely trying to find a sign of him either lying or making a move towards the tools. When Izuku didn't seem to find any, he looked back at the tools. Slowly Izuku reached his hand out to them and pulled it back a couple of times as if he expected the tools to attack him. When he touched one of them for the first time, he retracted his hand as quickly as possible before seeming to realize it hadn't hurt him and reached for it again. It went like that for a while until the boy was comfortable holding the tools in his hands. That's when Hitoshi spoke up again. Are you ready to take off the bracelet? Izuku studied him again before slowly nodding. Still seeming confused with the whole situation, but somehow he could feel this sort of mutual trust between them. They were both on the ground at this point, and Izuku reached his hand with the tools in them forward towards Hitoshi. You want me to take it off for you? It won't hurt, I promise. He reassured as he opened his hands so that Izuku could drop the tools in them. Okay. Izuku spoke slowly and dropped the tools in Hitoshi's hands. And slowly he got to work. At first, Izuku kept flinching when he got close, but after a few more tries and reassuring words, he had his hands on the cursed device and was prodding on it to get it to open up. Izuku watched his every move but didn't pull away anymore. It was obvious he didn't like it when their skin touched, so Hitoshi tried to avoid that as much as possible. Finally, the bracelet came loose. He did not even have time to think about how they were going to figure out Izuku's quirk. He didn't have time to put the tools away or ask the boy if he was okay. He just froze in place when suddenly the boy in front of him turned into a huge lion. He couldn't even react when the lion started rubbing its big head against his shoulder like a cat. What the F dash? He managed to choke out. Yamada POV. This day was not supposed to go the way it did. Shoyuta had left their apartment to go to a teacher's meeting and he hadn't locked the door behind himself. Hisashi didn't notice this fact until it was way too late. He also realized that maybe Shoyuta expected him to lock it from the inside, which would actually make a lot of sense, but he didn't even have time to think about that because as soon as he walked out of the bathroom after his shower, he noticed the air was a lot more chilly than it usually was. And the reason for that became obvious when he walked into the living room and saw the front door wide open. His heart dropped. This wasn't the end of the world, right? Maybe Izuku just wanted to see what was outside and left it open when he went back to his room. The little listener wasn't in the living room, so that was where he would be, right? His room. Yes, he just had to be in his room. He could barely keep himself from running to the kid's room to check. The door was opened a little bit, but not enough for him to be able to look inside, so he gave it a small push as he said, Izuku? Are you here? Did you open the front door? They had figured out that they could ask him yes and no questions, and the little listener would usually answer. He was learning Japanese faster than either of them had expected, even if he wasn't speaking yet. It felt like his heart just stopped beating altogether when the room was empty. No green-haired kid anywhere in sight. He called out louder this time. Izuku, where are you? Can you come here, please? But he got no answer. At this point he was running through the house, opening every door to check inside. Even opening the closets to make sure he hadn't hidden anywhere, and when he still couldn't find him, he grabbed his phone to call his husband. It took 3 tries to unlock his phone because of how much his fingers were shaking. When it finally unlocked, he quickly dialed his husband's number and the phone rang for only a few seconds. They were the longest seconds of his life. Hisashi, what's wrong? Is something the matter with Izuku? He didn't even let Shoyuta finish his sentence. You have to come home right now. He is gone, Sho. Oh my god, he's gone and it's my fault and dash. Hisashi, calm down. Tell me what happened. I don't know, okay. I just went for a shower after you left, and when I got back into the living room the front door was opened and I can't find Izuku anywhere. Dadzawa POV. He had barely arrived at UA when he got the call from his husband to tell him their problem child was missing. As fast as he could, Shoyuta got back in the car to make his way back home. He couldn't even report Izuku as missing. Going to a police station to tell them the 15-year-old had probably been gone for 30 minutes, there was absolutely no way anyone would take him seriously. But there was one officer he could trust, one officer who he knew would trust him to tell the truth. Who knew that when Shoyuta called in an emergency, it was to be taken seriously. And that officer was Sansa. They had worked together on investigations occasionally. So he dialed Sansa's personal number while breaking every speed limit to get back to the apartment as fast as he could. Eraser? It's unlike you to call me on my personal number. Are you all right? The cat-headed man said when he picked up the phone and likely either recognized his number or had him added to his contacts. Sansa, I need to ask for a favor. If there was anyone that could help them, it was this man. With the extra senses his quirk gave him and his ability to access police information, he had a bigger chance of quickly finding Izuku than Hisashi and Shoyuta had together. Izuku POV. Finally he had found the reason for not being able to change back into his real body. Apparently, this bracelet was suppressing his quirk. From what he gathered, the thing that gave him the ability to become human was called a quirk. And apparently this was a normal thing? The Shinso had seemed confused at the fact that he didn't know what a quirk was, so maybe more people had some kind of strange ability. Superpower, the Shinso had called it. He wondered if the Shinso, the Hisashi and the Shoyuta had one too. But for now he was content that the Shinso got him his body back and decided that this human was his new favorite human. So he cuddled up to the Shinso, rubbing his head on the human's shoulder while purring to show his appreciation. It was apparent that the Shinso had not expected him to turn into a lion. But luckily the human slowly unfroze, choking out a "what the F," which he wasn't actually sure of what it meant. It didn't take long for the human to relax into his lion form though. The human's hand slowly came up to his head, which made him flinch at first, and the Shinso left his hand in the air, close to his head for a couple of seconds before reaching forward again to start scratching him behind his ears. He had never felt what it was like to be pet. The Shoyuta and the Hisashi would pet the BSTD sometimes, so he knew what it was. He had seen how much the BSTRD seemed to enjoy it, but he never knew just how relaxing it was. He closed his eyes and leaned into the touch. Well, I guess we found your quirk, the Shinso said. But you can't talk like this though. The human seemed sad about that. He didn't want the human sad. The Shinso had helped him after all. But could he really give up his real body again so soon just because he wanted to make the Shinso happy? He could always turn back later, right? He now knew not to trust the bracelets. So as long as he didn't touch a bracelet it should be fine, right? He let go of the mental string and it snapped back in place. His body morphed back in less than seconds and the Shinso let out a yelp. He found himself still in the human's lap, but he didn't mind. He was content staying here. He kept purring even if it sounded weird with this body. The Shinso laughed then and he decided he liked the sound. You know, the human started. That is kind of cool. You're like a big cat. He wasn't sure what a cat was, but the Shinso seemed happy about it, so it must be a good thing. Do you know why you aren't allowed to use your quirk? It doesn't seem villainous to me. He thought about it for a second. They probably wanted him to be human, right? So they likely didn't want him to be as much of a lion as he was. Maybe they wanted him to be a human with lion traits like they were instead of the lion with human traits he was. That thought kind of saddened him. So he let his face fall as he slowly looked for the words he needed. They do not want Izuku. The smile on the Shinso's face disappeared as soon as he finished that sentence. Well, they're stupid for not wanting you, the human told him decidedly. He wasn't sure if he should correct the Shinso. He had said they didn't want a lion. They did want him, or so it seemed. They just didn't want a lion. But then the Shinso was petting his head again, and he let the thought go to lean into the touch again. They stayed like that for a few minutes until a loud high-pitched noise echoed through the house and his head shot up. His body went rigid and his eyes scanned his surroundings trying to find the source of the noise. He felt the Shinso tense as well, and they both froze when they heard voices coming from somewhere else in the house. He couldn't hear what the voices were saying until the voice he had heard earlier called up. Hitoshi, could you and your friend come down please? The Shinso and him shared a look before the human slowly rose to his feet and made his way to where the voice came from. He followed but made sure to stay behind the human. When they came downstairs, they saw a woman and a person who was some kind of weird combination between a BSTRD and a human. It confused him so much that he couldn't help but whisper, BS sturdy. While looking at the strange human. The Shinso seemed to have heard him and looked at him before glaring at the weird human. Then the BSTRD human spoke up. Hey Izuku, I'm here to bring you back to your dad's. Do you want to come with me or would you like me to call them to pick you up? The weird-looking human spoke and then added. You can shake your head if you are okay coming with me and nod if you want me to call them. He had no clue what dads were and who they were meant to be, so he didn't move his head like requested. The Shinso seemed to understand though. The younger human was obviously not happy with the situation and took a protective stance in front of him before he replied for him. I don't know who you are, but Izuku is not going anywhere. Oh, my apologies for not introducing myself sooner. Hitoshi-kun, was it? The BSN said as he took something out of his pocket that looked a bit like a small book without pages. Shinso. The Shinso corrected. The BSRDman showed the Shinso the object. Shinsu-kun then. My name is Sansa and I work as an officer here at the local police department. The Shinso just looked angrier now. In that case you must be a really shitty officer if you're trying to bring a child back to his abusive parents. Hitoshi. Mind your manners please. The woman said, but the Shinso ignored her. The BSRDman blinked a couple of times, which confused him because it didn't look like the half-human did it out of trust. Instead the man looked confused. Excuse me? The Shinso scoffed. Alright, let me just call Eraserhead. There seems to be a misunderstanding and I'm sure he can shed some light on the situation. The Shinso's eyes widened. Eraserhead? You mean the underground hero Eraserhead? The one and only. I'm surprised you've heard of him though. Of course, he is my favorite hero. He could see the enthusiasm in the Shinso's face before it quickly changed back into a scowl. Well, if he's coming here I'm sure he would agree not to let Izuku go back there. The BSRDman looked like he tried to hide a smile before saying, Okay, we'll see indeed. Then the man took a device out of his pocket and tapped it a few times before holding it against his ear. Eraser? Yes, I found him. I'll send you the address of where he's at. There seems to be some kind of situation though, so I'll need you to pick him up. Yourself? Was the BSRD human really talking to the small human tool in his hand? That must be one of the weirdest things he had seen a human to. Although this couldn't be a real human, so maybe this was normal for this half-human. No, there's no danger. You'll see when you get here. All right. The cat man put the device back in his pocket. He then looked back at the Shinso. He's on his way. He said he will be here in about 5 minutes. Dadzawa POV. Hizashi get in the car. Sansa's found Izuku. He told his husband. He had no idea what kind of a situation Izuku could be in that didn't involve any danger, but it couldn't be any good, so he wasn't about to waste time getting there. Shoyuta and Hizashi made their way to the address Sansa had sent them. It looked to be a normal house, which made Shoyuta wonder what the hell his problem child was doing there. It must have something to do with the situation Sansa was talking about, but he couldn't for the life of him come up with what this situation could be. When they got there the door was left open and Sansa greeted them there. Shoyuta muttered a thanks for finding the kids so fast to the officer while the man guided them inside the house. They were met with the sight of Izuku standing on his own 2 feet, which still hadn't failed to make him proud, with a boy about the kid's age standing protectively in front of him. Izuku looked obviously relieved at seeing them but was mostly eyeing Shoyuta. Eraser, Mike, this is Shinsu-kun. Sansa gestured to the purple-haired kid in front of Izuku. Shinsu-kun, meet Eraserhead and present Mike. Both of them showed the kid and the woman who might be the kid's mom their hero license. Shinso looked at Shoyuta with wide eyes. I can't believe the Eraserhead is in my house. Shinso muttered, and he probably hadn't meant for them to hear him, but after years of underground hero work, it was loud and clear to Shoyuta. Shinsu-kun has some concerns about Izuku's home life. Sansa continued. Both Shoyuta and Hizashi rose their eyebrows at this. Alright, what makes you think that, kid? Shoyuta asked him seriously, not giving anything away. The purple-haired kid's expression became serious as well. From the things he's told me, it's pretty obvious that he's being abused at home. Shoyuta did a double take. He needed a moment to process what the kid had just said. What do you mean, what he has told you? Well, from what he said this time Hisashi cut him off. He spoke to you? Shoyuta was at a loss for words. He honestly should have known the problem child should be able to speak by now with how much he could understand. But after the very first time he tried, they had never heard him attempt it again. And then there was the second thing. What the hell had the problem child said to make this kid think they were abusing him? Yeah, was he not meant to? Shinso seemed just as confused as them now. More like he hasn't been able to before. Hisashi exclaimed, completely missing the point that apparently the first time Izuku spoke, he expressed that he is unhappy with his home life. He would never admit how much that thought hurt. Dadzawa POV. Alright, well, first things first, Shoyuta said. He made sure his voice didn't betray the sadness he felt at what the purple-haired kid had implied. Can you tell us what made you think Izuku is being abused? Shinso still stood in front of Izuku, who was looking very confused at what was happening. They had never taught him the word abuse, so unless Shinso had explained it, the kid probably had no idea what that even meant. Well, first off, he looked like he hadn't been outside for a long time. When we were outside, he was looking at every small thing with wide eyes like he hadn't seen it in years, if at all. And that's not even the worst thing. Okay, Shoyuta could see how that would look worrying. But luckily, he knew very well why that was. It was the first time the kid was outside in civilization after all, and it didn't prove that Izuku was unhappy with his life at home. Then he was also wearing a Quirk suppressor. What good parent makes their kid wear one of those? Just because they don't like their quirk? That's bullshit. It sounded like Shinso was personally offended by this, which made Shoyuta worry about him. What had this child been through to even recognize a Quirk suppressor? It was? What do you mean he was wearing a Quirk suppressor? He asked as his gaze fell to Izuku's wrist, which was now bare. And the problem child was still human. Did that mean the problem child hasn't shifted back to his lion form as soon as he got the chance? Or did Shinso somehow convince him to turn human again? Hisashi must have picked up on the same thing as he gasped. Izuku, you decided to stay human? The blonde asked flabbergasted. I mean, he was, because I took it off for him. He didn't even know what quirks were. Shinso answered Shoyuta, apparently choosing to ignore Hisashi's outburst. Shoyuta suppressed a groan. It looked like there was more to unpack here than he had originally thought. But before he could ask another question, Shinso continued. And he didn't stay human. He turned into a lion seconds after it was off. But he turned back so he could talk to me again. Shoyuta glanced at his husband, who was clearly trying to keep the tears from showing in his eyes. He had to admit he hadn't expected Izuku to choose being human and talking over staying in his lion form. And you should hear his voice, he has so much trouble speaking. It was as if he hadn't spoken in a long time, so I doubt his guardians allow him to. He then turned to Izuku, who looked to be trying to make himself look smaller, clearly not knowing how to react to this situation. I'm sorry, Izuku. He added softly. You don't deserve to go back to people who didn't treat you right. Shoyuta decided he had heard enough and sighed. He could see Izuku's legs starting to wobble as well, clearly not used to staying up on two legs this long. Shinso, how about you accompany us to our apartment so we can sit down and talk about Izuku's situation? He turned to Izuku then. I'm sure you would like to rest as well, Izuku. Izuku nodded and looked relieved. Shinso had turned towards the green-haired kid and his serious expression turned to one of confusion. Clearly not understanding why he would need to go to the hero's apartment, but he didn't seem reluctant at the suggestion. Quite the opposite, actually. Seriously? You? I'm going to Eraserhead's apartment. Yeah. Hisashi cut in. If you and Izuku get along, I'm sure you'll be over more often anyway. Before Shinso got the chance to think about that, Shoyuta quickly asked the woman, who he had almost forgotten about, if it was okay for the boy to join them. When she agreed, Shoyuta led the way. Hisashi, can you drive the car back? I'll walk with the kids. His husband agreed. They both knew this was not the right time to introduce Izuku to car rides as well. Izuku POV. He had thought he had the human language down by now. But he really didn't. He had no idea what was going on anymore. What he did know, the Shoyuta was back. And the Hisashi was with the man. That must mean that the Hizashi had found the Shoyuda while he had accidentally forgotten about his search when he was with the Shinso. Oops. At least they were all back together now. And it looked like the Shinso was coming back with them. But then the Hizashi went a different route than the rest of them. Why would the human do that? Were they really that reckless? Hizashi was going to drive the car? What did that even mean? He had no clue. They made their way through more crowded places this time, and he made sure to stick close to his pride, not wanting anyone else to separate. Soon enough he started recognizing the territory. And they were back at their apartment soon after. He instantly felt better upon entering this own territory. And to his surprise, the Hizashi was there too. The Shinsu's eyes roamed all over the place just like he had done when he had left the familiarity of his home. Is it all right for Shinsu-kun to be here, Izuku? The Shoyuda asked him. He nodded. If the Shinso was part of their pride now, he should stay in their territory too. The Hizashi gave the Shoyuda a questioning look, to which the Shoyuda responded with a shrug. All right, let's all have a seat. The Shoyuda announced then while gesturing to the seating area in the living room. While the three found a place to sit, the Hizashi made some tea for everyone. Never in his life had he thought he would like warm flavored water, but tea quickly became something he would never pass up on. While letting his cup warm his hands, he listened to the Shuda's situation. Shinsu-kun, first of all, I want to thank you for making sure Izuku was safe and for trying to help him with his home life. The Hizashi started, and the Shinsu's face turned a light shade of red, which made him tilt his head. Could the Shinso change the color of his skin at will? Was that a superpower the human had been talking about earlier? It was nothing really, the boy said while trying to hide his face and looking down. He also noted the Shinso tried to hide his emotions, but the boy was nowhere near as good at it as the Shoyuda was, so he had no trouble reading the surprise on the Shinso's face. I can see why you would assume Izuku might be abused, but luckily this is not the case. Izuku has actually been living with Shoyuda, or as you know him, Eraserhead, and me for only a few months now. Before that he lived in Africa. The blonde explained. Some recognition flashed across the Shinsu's features. Is that why he has so much trouble speaking? Because he is learning Japanese? The Shoyuda cut in then. Yes and no. It's more complicated than that. The fact that he spoke to you at all is very surprising to us. The Shinsu's raised an eyebrow in confusion, but the Shoyuda kept explaining. He lived in Africa ever since his quirk first came in, and hasn't had any human contact from that moment on until we brought him back to Japan. The purple-haired human's eyes widened. But if he hasn't had any human contact, how did he survive? The Shoyuda smiled sadly. For 10 years he lived among wild lions. The researchers in the area only found out he was different when they noticed his eye color. That confused him. He had lived among lions? He had no idea what lions were, but he should know, right? If he lived with these lions his entire life, he should at least be able to guess what they were. But he could come up with nothing. The Shinso must have noticed his confusion, and the human narrowed his eyes in suspicion. Is this true, Izuku? Remembering how the Shinso got upset when he didn't use human words, he decided to voice his question. What is lions? The Hizashi squealed at hearing his voice, but after having gotten used to the weird loud noise the human tended to make, he didn't pay it any mind. Izuku. He lived with lions. All the humans frowned. Did he say something wrong? He was pretty sure he used the correct words. Right? No, wait, that wasn't true. The words changed when speaking about something that happened in the past. And there was also the hissing sound after a word that was meant to be multiple. Lived with Izukus. You lived alone? No, the Shinso still wasn't understanding him. But before he could think about what else he could have said wrong, the Shoyuda cut in. Izuku, can you describe an Izuku for me? This he could do. He didn't notice the questioning looks the other humans gave the man as he thought about all the features a lion had. Izuku. 4 legs, and hair. He gestured with his hands around his face to show how the manes of a lion went all around their head instead of just on top. No. Fingers. At this point both the Hizashi and the Shinso seemed to be understanding what he was talking about as well. Oh little listener, the Hizashi said quietly, which was quite an abnormal thing for him to do. Izuku. You are Izuku. A lion has 4 legs, a tail, manes, and no fingers. Izuku is your name. It is what we call you. Just like my name is Hizashi. Everyone has their own name, kid, the Shoyuda added. His name was Izuku? And Blonde Mane's name was Hizashi, Black Mane's name was Shoyuda, and Purple Mane's name was Shinso? He looked from one to the other. I'm sorry we never properly explained this to you, problem child. An apology from the Shoyuda was rare. Izuku didn't always understand the point of apologies. But it was clear there was meaning behind them, especially from Shoyuda. He felt this warmth in his chest. He was Izuku. He was a lion and he was Izuku. He had never known what a name was before. But somehow having one made him feel good. It made him feel more whole. And looking around himself, to Shoyuda and Hizashi, who cared for him and taught him everything he wanted to learn without him having to ask first. And he looked at Shinso, his first real friend. Izuku didn't even know what that word meant, but he did know that Shinso was his friend. Surrounded by his family and friend. He felt complete. The only thing he needed now was a kaken. What's a kaken?